Chapter 184. He was cruel, ruthless, and merciless. The strong smell of blood drifted in the air, causing a large number of monks to cry bitterly. They looked at Yi Xian with hatred and fear in their eyes. They even trembled as they chanted the Rebirth Sutra to expiate the souls of the dead old monks. Amitabha. Kitagarbha put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. His face was sad and calm. He did not show too much sadness because of his junior brother's death, as if all of this was within his expectations. In the past, Kitagarbha Bodhisattva swore that he would not become a Buddha until hell was empty. Today, this poor monk will sacrifice himself to eliminate the demon and return the world to its former glory. Kitagarbha sat cross-legged and chanted the Rebirth Sutra. His body emitted a merciful Buddhist light. Rumble. The space rippled as the Buddhist light shone. An extremely surging Buddhist light surged in the void. A 9-story pagoda rose from the ground. The surging Buddhist light blotted out the sky and the earth. A subduing demon golden pestle shot out from the pagoda and bloomed with a resplendent Buddhist light in the void. The subduing demon golden pestle was too surging and too resplendent. When this supreme treasure of Buddhism appeared, the sound of Buddha's chanting could be heard from all directions. There was also a golden Buddhist lotus that appeared in the void. It made people feel a great sense of awe when they looked at it. Amitabha. Kitagarbha chanted the name of Buddha with a sorrowful expression. In the past, when my ancestral master passed away, he left behind his last words. If a demon bewitches the world, even if my little thunderclap temple is destroyed, I will definitely exterminate the demon and return the world to its former glory. Yi Xian, you have killed the innocent and harmed the cultivators of the world. Even if this old monk dies today, I will take you to Avicii and sink you into hell forever. Amitabha. Kitagarbha put his palms together and his body emitted a merciful golden light. His body rapidly shriveled as an extremely terrifying Buddhist light drowned him. After a dozen breaths, Kitagarbha disappeared and a golden sarira appeared in the void. Senior brother. Abbot. You damned demon. All the monks in the temple roared. They looked at Yi Xian with eyes filled with hatred that they had never seen before. Wang. The subduing demon golden pestle surged with light, and the golden sarira hummed as it rotated. When the two sacred objects of the Buddhist sect merged into one, something extremely terrifying happened. Bang! The sky exploded and the void collapsed. 100-meter-tall illusory Buddha sat cross-legged in the void. The golden Buddha's body radiated light in all directions. The merciful Buddha's light illuminated the firmament, making the atmosphere of this part of the world even more sorrowful and heavy. T-Buddha Dharma idol. The legend is actually true. The Patriarch has appeared. The Patriarch has appeared. All the monks of the Little Thunderclap Temple were crying tears of joy. Everyone's faces were filled with excitement because they knew that when the Buddha's Dharma idol appeared, the so-called divine King Yi Xian would definitely die. At this moment, Yi Xian stared at the Buddha Dharma form from afar. When he opened and closed his eyes, a cold light flashed through his eyes. Because of the appearance of the Buddha Dharma form, he felt that the qi and blood in his body were somewhat unstable. This feeling had nothing to do with his cultivation. It was a natural restraint. One had to know that Yi Xian's cultivation was all obtained by devouring the qi and blood. His hands were stained with the blood of millions of living beings. The resentment and anger around him were extremely strong. Since ancient times, Buddhism and demons had been incompatible. In the distant past, when the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was rich, people like Yi Xian who had killed too many people would be suppressed by the Buddhist sect's Dharma when they encountered an eminent Buddhist monk. It was normal for Yi Xian to have such a feeling. Life is like a fog and also like a dream. Fate arises and perishes. The Buddha Dharma form put its palms together and recited a sutra. Golden lotuses rose in the void, and thousands of chanting sounds faintly came from all directions. Benefactor, you have killed too many people and have stepped onto the demonic path. If you can put down your butcher's knife and wholeheartedly convert to Buddhism, you will be free and unfettered. The Buddha Dharma form spoke tirelessly, and the Buddha's light shone down. Its voice was filled with compassion. My Buddha has shown himself. Such a scene made all the monks of the small thunder temple blush. They all knelt down and recited the Buddha's name loudly. Who are you? Yi Xian gradually narrowed his eyes and looked at the Buddha Dharma form with a trace of doubt in his eyes. Although Yi Xian had not cultivated for a long time, he had read the Immortal Sutra thoroughly. His knowledge was comparable to that of the immortals in the earth immortal realm. According to Yi Xian's knowledge, the so-called Buddha Dharma form was a kind of thing without spiritual intelligence. It was a kind of Buddhist sect's Dharma spell, and it could not speak human language at all. As for the Buddha Dharma idol that appeared in front of Yi Xian, not only could it speak in human language, it even emitted a Buddhist light that filled the sky as it advised him. How could Yi Xian not be suspicious? Amitabha Buddha. The Buddha Dharma form recited the Buddha's name loudly. Its voice was compassionate and said, "The world calls me Amitabha Buddha, and there are also sentient beings who call me Buddha. It's just that the world is like fog and illusion, real and fake, mediocre and mediocre. I have shown myself here with the intention of helping benefactor. I hope that benefactor can repent and be saved from the sea of bitterness." Ha! All of a sudden, Yi Xian laughed wildly. His laughter was extremely wild, and a trace of contempt and mockery flashed across his eyes as he looked at the Buddha Dharma form. Amitabha Buddha. Yi Xian said in a strange voice, "If you are Amitabha Buddha, then who is the Amitabha Buddha in the earth immortal realm? Or is it that the Buddha in the spirited mountain is fake, and you are the real one?" As Yi Xian's voice fell, the Buddha Dharma form's aura was obviously stifled, and the Buddha's light that bloomed around it fluctuated slightly, but it quickly returned to normal. Amitabha Buddha. Almsgiver, you have been stubbornly obstinate and have fallen deeply into the demonic path. I can only eliminate the demonic path between heaven and earth. The Buddha Dharma form spoke benevolently, and the endless sky rumbled. The terrifying Buddha's light covered the sky and the earth, as if it would kill Yi Xian in the next moment. Yi Xian did not show any fear, and his smile was extremely mocking. He said, "Interesting, very interesting. I am standing right here, and I would like to see what kind of abilities you, Amitabha Buddha, have." "Buddha, please exorcise this demon and return peace to the world," Monk Pu Hua cried out loudly. "Buddha above, please show the world. This Yi Xian wants to destroy the 1,000-year-old heritage of the small thunder temple. For the sake of the Buddhist heritage not to be severed, please take action and exorcise this demon." Many monks put their palms together and kept praying to the Buddha Dharma form. Unfortunately, under the praying of many monks, the Buddha Dharma form did not attack Yi Xian, even though it was emitting boundless Buddha's light. This puzzled all the monks of the small thunder temple. Amitabha Buddha. Almsgiver Yi, you have committed grave sins and killed many people. If you can convert to Buddhism, it is not too late. The Buddha Dharma form's voice was sorrowful, and it was still trying to persuade Yi Xian. However, in Yi Xian's eyes, the Buddha Dharma form was already panicking and was just putting on an act. Chapter 185. At the same time, in the 9-level demon subduing pagoda of the small thunderclap temple, an old monk's body was shriveled up like a mummy. It was as if he had lost all his vitality. However, the corpse was currently surrounded by an eerie aura of death. Even its body was trembling slightly, and the blood-red light in its eyes was terrifying and frightening. How is this possible? How is this possible? I cultivated the Dharma of Buddha and demon to survive until today. Could he have seen through my true form? The mummy trembled as the aura of death around him became even more chaotic. In the small thunderclap temple, Buddhist light filled the sky as the Buddha's Dharma idol had a sorrowful expression. Under the bitter pleas of the monks, the Buddha's Dharma idol didn't attack Yi Xian. This caused the monks to be puzzled. "Since you don't dare to attack me, I'll kill all these monks in front of you." I'll destroy your small thunderclap temple that has been passed down for thousands of years. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and his expression was extremely strange. Under the Buddhist light that filled the sky, he walked towards the monks of the little thunder temple with large strides. The cruel smile on his face caused people to feel an extremely cold feeling in their hearts when they looked at him. Poof! Yi Xian pointed his sword and a bloody light streaked across the sky. A monk's head was separated from his body. He died tragically at Yi Xian's feet. From the beginning to the end, the monk thought that the Buddha would save him. However, when he was about to die, he opened his eyes wide and saw that the Buddha's Dharma idol didn't move at all. His eyes started to fade away, and he completely lost his life force. With great reluctance, he left the world. Junior brother. Senior brother Qing Su. Disciple. When the monk died tragically at Yi Xian's hands, a large number of angry roars could be heard. TSK, TSK, TSK. Yi Xian shook his head slowly. He looked back at the Buddha's Dharma power and said in a strange voice, "Are you just going to watch them die tragically here without doing anything?" Ba. The Buddha said bitterly, "We Buddhists are willing to sacrifice our lives. If their deaths can bring back the kindness in our benefactor's heart, this is a great merit, a great good deed." As the compassionate voice of the Buddha fell, a large number of monks were dumbfounded. They could not understand. Did they have to sacrifice their own lives just to call back Yi Xian's conscience? Puff! Blade light swept across the sky, killing everything in its path. A streak of resplendent blood-red light shot out from Yi Xian's hand, killing a dozen or so monks on the spot. Their beautiful blood stained the ground, and a large number of cries and wails could be heard. "Buddha, please be merciful. Please subdue this demon. Buddha, this person has already fallen deeply into the demonic path and has no intention of repenting. If we don't get rid of this demon today, the heavens will not tolerate it." A large number of monks knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the Buddha Dharma idol. The sound of sobbing could be heard from their mouths, but the Buddha Dharma idol did not move at all. "Ha! I'm a demon." Yi Xian's expression was strange, and his voice was cruel and ferocious. He said, "The world is called the universe, and since ancient times, it has been called the universe. The sky is Qian, and the earth is Kuan. Isn't this world yin and yang? All living things are divided into male and female, and humans are divided into good and evil. Without the slaughter of demons, how can there be the compassion of Buddhas? You keep saying that I'm a demon, and even flaunt yourself as Buddhas. Then let me ask you, if one day there is no more slaughter in this world, and Buddhists no longer need to save all living things, what's the use of Buddhists then?" Like the morning bell and evening drum, like thunder from the ninth heaven, when Yi Xian's words rang out, all the monks of the small thunder temple were stunned. Some of them even murmured. Without the slaughter of demons, where is the compassion of Buddhas? Without the slaughter of demons, where is the compassion of Buddhas? Yi Xian's simple words spoke of all the good and evil in the world, and made all the monks present perplexed. The profound meaning of Buddhism that they had believed in for so many years seemed to have collapsed at this moment. "I slaughter the world, I slaughter the human world, but the world respects me as the divine king. The so-called salvation of the world by Buddhists is just your wishful thinking. Today, I, Yi Xian, will destroy your small thunder temple. Let's see if your Buddha will save you. Kill." Yi Xian's sword pointed across the sky, and his killing intent filled the sky. His expression was cruel and ferocious. In the eyes of the Buddha's Dharma form, sword chi filled the sky and brutally penetrated the bodies of many monks. Puff! 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 Blood sprayed everywhere, and corpses floated on the ground. A large number of monks turned into cold corpses and fell at Yi Xian's feet. With every step he took, more and more corpses appeared at Yi Xian's feet. Unfortunately, the Buddha's Dharma form had been watching silently from the beginning. Even the merciful Buddha's light around him had disappeared without a trace. The sinister look in his eyes seemed to have solidified. Buddha, tell me, is there really no Buddha in this world if there are no demons? Buddha, I have always believed that Buddhism can save the world, and that we can step into the Western Pure Land after death. But why is my heart telling me that we are wrong, really wrong? What bullshit, Buddha? My senior and junior brothers, why haven't you woken up yet? If he really is Buddha, how could he watch Yi Xian mercilessly slaughter us? All sorts of unwilling questions and angry curses rang out in the small thunderclap temple. The faith of these monks had completely collapsed. Some of them were even running away pathetically. They wanted to escape from this place and avoid this calamity of death. You trash! All of a sudden, a sinister roar came from the mouth of the Buddha's Dharma form. An extremely dense death chi covered him. That pitch-black Buddha's body was emitting an extremely violent aura. All the monks were speechless as they stared at the Buddha they believed in. It was as though their souls had left their bodies. Ha! Yi Xian laughed sinisterly, do you see that? This is your so-called Buddha. This is his true face. Impossible. Why is this happening? A large number of monks murmured in fear. They could not believe what they were seeing. At this moment, the Buddha's Dharma form was surrounded by the death chi. The merciful face was gone, and the way it looked at Yi Xian was filled with a fear that had never been seen before. Yi Xian, I have to say that since you can see through my Dharma form, your cultivation base must be above mine. But don't get cocky. Wait till I devour a large amount of blood chi and my cultivation base returns to its peak. That will be the death of you, Yi Xian. Xing! The void trembled as ripples spread out. The Buddha's Dharma form turned into a black light and disappeared into the void. Clearly, he knew that even if he were to attack with all his might, he would not be a match for Yi Xian. Why would he risk his life to fight Yi Xian for the monks of the small thunder temple? This was also the reason why the Buddha's Dharma form had been enduring all this while. Trying to run. Do you think you can run? Yi Xian's body didn't move as a cruel sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth. It was all because no one could safely escape in front of him, Yi Xian. Chapter 186. Sir. All of a sudden, a large number of footsteps came from behind Yi Xian. Gu Beichen and Zhuo Junting led the members of the Mansion of the Dead to Yi Xian. When they saw the corpses on the ground, their eyes narrowed. They knew that this was the work of Yi Xian. Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive. Take away all their cultivation techniques. Yes, your subordinate obeys. Gu Beichen and the rest smiled cruelly. They raised the blood sabers in their hands and brutally attacked the few remaining monks. A crushing massacre unfolded in the small thunderclap temple. When the faith of these monks collapsed, they had already lost the ability to fight. Gu Beichen and the rest were at their peak. In less than an hour, they had slaughtered everyone in the small thunderclap temple and looted a large number of cultivation secret manuals from the sutra depository. While Gu Beichen and the rest were massacring the temple, Yi Xian had already walked into the Demon Suppression Tower with his hands behind his back. Demon Suppression Tower. As the name suggested, it was the place where the small thunderclap temple suppressed evil spirits. The small thunderclap temple had stood tall in the divine continent for thousands of years. In that distant era, it was one of the most outstanding Buddhist sects in the world. The Demon Suppression Tower's reputation was feared by countless evil spirits. The Demon Suppression Tower was divided into 9 levels. From the first level to the 9th level, all the famous evil spirits of the past were suppressed. The world had changed, and time had changed. With the passage of time, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth no longer existed. The evil spirits that were once imprisoned in the Demon Suppression Tower had long turned into skeletons under the erosion of time. This caused the entire Demon Suppression Tower to be deathly silent. On the first level of the Demon Suppression Tower, in a dark cell, there was an unpleasant smell. All kinds of angry curses could be heard. Yi Xian strolled forward until he arrived in front of a cell. A familiar figure entered his sight. Damn it! When Lao Tzu gets out, he will definitely kill all of you bald donkeys and tear your bodies into pieces. Fatso Huang's clothes were dirty and messy. He was tied up in a cell by dozens of steel chains, but he was still cursing loudly. It was obvious that he was extremely angry and unwilling to be imprisoned here. Seeing that you're not dead and still alive, I'm relieved. Yi Xian smiled. Who is talking to Lao Tzu? Fatso Huang was bound by dozens of steel chains and could not move. Naturally, he could not see Yi Xian's face, so he cursed anxiously. Bang! The door of the cell was shattered. To Fatso Huang. Fatso Huang. Sir. Fatty Huang was stunned for a moment as he looked at Yi Xian in front of him. Then, his face instantly flushed red. Joy flashed through his eyes as he said, Sir, I knew you would come to save me. Yi Xian, Brother Huang, save us. As Fatso Huang was freed, dozens of surprised voices could be heard from the first floor of the demon-subduing pagoda. It was obvious that a large number of villains were imprisoned here by the monks of the small Thunder Temple. Sir, these people are all vicious. I want to take them into the underworld. I'll be able to create a group of elites very quickly. Fatso Huang bowed to Yi Xian. Yi Xian nodded slowly. The people that Fatso Huang took a fancy to were obviously not ordinary. This made Yi Xian agree to Fatso Huang's proposal. Soon, a large number of villains were released by Yi Xian. Under the leadership of Fatso Huang, these villains were excited and expressed their loyalty to Yi Xian. They patted their chests and promised that they would kill whoever Yi Xian asked them to. Yi Xian smiled at the villains' loyalty and did not feel much. He quietly gave Fatso Huang a look, which made Fatso Huang understand and nod. Fatty Huang knew that Yi Xian was telling him that these villains were all unruly. Now that they were rescued, they might be moved to tears. However, once these villains left the demon-suppressing pagoda, it would be hard to say where they would go. Yi Xian was not a person who liked to help others. He was a person who would not do anything without benefits. Since he had saved these people, the lives of these villains belonged to him, Yi Xian. Fatso Huang naturally knew that Yi Xian did not trust these people. He already had a plan in mind. Once they left the demon-subduing pagoda, he would use a slow-acting poison to control these villains. This was a foolproof method. From this, it could be seen that Yi Xian's creation of the underworld was an extremely wise decision. With a talent like Fatso Huang, it could be said that Yi Xian could save a lot of effort on trivial matters. If it were in the past, Yi Xian would have to personally take action and plant a blood contract on these villains. This was undoubtedly a waste of Yi Xian's time. Fatso Huang, let them understand the rules of the underworld. You can take them and leave. Yi Xian said softly. Sir, there are still living people on the first floor of the demon-subduing pagoda. There is no one on the upper 8 floors. Are you not going to leave with us? Fatso Huang asked doubtfully. Ha! Yi Xian's lips curled into a sneer. His voice was strange as he said, You're wrong. There is still old Dong in this demon-subduing pagoda. If I don't find him, won't it show that I, Yi Xian, am incompetent? As Yi Xian spoke, he walked directly to the 2nd floor of the demon-subduing pagoda. Fatso Huang quickly came to his senses and called the villains behind him to quickly leave the demon-subduing pagoda. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps sounded in the demon-subduing pagoda. Yi Xian walked up the stairs to the 9th floor of the demon-subduing pagoda. All the skeletons along the way were reflected in his eyes. With just a glance, Yi Xian could tell that these skeletons were left behind by the evil demons. Their bones seemed to be made of jade and were still emitting a fluorescent light. It was also at this moment that Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. A thought flashed through his mind and a look of contempt flashed across his eyes. The 9th floor of the demon-subduing pagoda. As soon as Yi Xian stepped into this place, he saw a dried corpse lying limp on the ground. There was no sign of life around it, as if it had been dead for a long time. Tap, tap, tap. Yi Xian strolled to the dried corpse. When he opened his eyes, there was a flash of blood in his eyes. "You're still too inexperienced to play dead in front of me." In this strange atmosphere, Yi Xian's voice was cold and emotionless. However, the dried corpse did not react at all. It was as if it had really lost its life. "I have to say that you're a genius in Buddhism. In these thousands of years, you've devoured the essence of some demons on the 9th floor of the demon-subduing pagoda every once in a while. That's why you've endured so bitterly until today. This is indeed commendable for you." Yi Xian spoke to himself. He did not reveal any aura around him. However, a cold and fierce look flashed across his eyes as he looked at the dried corpse. At this moment, the temperature of the 9th floor of the demon-subduing pagoda was quietly dropping. If an ordinary person was here, they would definitely be scared silly by this eerie and terrifying atmosphere. "I'll count to 3. If you continue to pretend to be dead with me, I'll destroy your body and shatter your primordial spirit so that you'll never be able to reincarnate." Yi Xian's eyes narrowed as his voice was vicious and merciless. Chapter 187. Crack. 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 The sound of joints cracking could be heard, and the lifeless mummy finally moved. It slowly twisted its neck, and when its eyes opened and closed, there was a crimson light flashing in them. An eerie aura of death surrounded its body. "How did you know I was here?" the mummy said coldly as he stared at Yi Xian. There was a hint of fear in his eyes. He couldn't understand how Yi Xian could still find his real body even though he had concealed his aura to the extreme. "With your cultivation, an ordinary person would definitely be intimidated by you. Unfortunately, your tricks are still too inexperienced in front of me." That old monk Pudu was extremely stupid. He sacrificed himself to summon the subduing demon golden pestle, but he didn't know that the subduing demon golden pestle was your Dharma artifact. His flesh and blood essence were all devoured by you. Yi Xian spoke tirelessly as if he was talking about a very ordinary matter. However, his words caused the mummy's aura to become chaotic, and the aura of death around him became even more intense. The world is at the end of its days, and there is no spiritual energy. This poor monk didn't expect that someone like you would appear in this world. However, do you think you can kill me just because you found my real body? The mummy slowly got up. His gloomy, blood-red eyes were too cold. He slowly retreated, and the angry cries of the dead souls could be heard around him. His dry lips parted slightly as if he was smiling at Yi Xian. "I cultivate the Buddhist and demon Dharma, and I have obtained the blood chi devouring technique that you spread to the world. It won't be long before I devour endless blood chi. My cultivation will return to its peak, and I will be able to seek the legendary Tongtian immortal path." The mummy laughed. His 7 orifices were bleeding, but his blood was as black as ink. His white eyes were sinister and terrifying. An extremely obscure energy fluctuation bloomed around him, and a 5 elements array appeared under his feet. The power of the array caused the space around him to distort slightly. The 5 elements teleportation array was built by ancient immortal cultivators. It can teleport thousands of miles in an instant. This poor monk has to thank you. If it weren't for your blood chi devouring technique, this poor monk wouldn't have been able to refine the blood chi in my body to activate this array. Wang. The 5 phases teleportation formation shone brightly, and the space around it twisted until the corpse became illusory. In the blink of an eye, it vanished from Yi Xian's sight. Clearly, the mummy was already prepared when Yi Xian stepped into the demon-suppressing pagoda. Even if Yi Xian found it, it could quickly escape from this place. "Can you leave?" Yi Xian's eyes were gloomy and his voice was venomous and cold. So close, yet worlds apart. Time seemed to stop, and space seemed to be hanging upside down. Yi Xian's palm glowed, and when he stretched out his palm, the space suddenly collapsed. Bang! With a deafening boom, the 5 elements shifting formation instantly shattered. The corpse that had originally disappeared was suddenly sucked back by Yi Xian, causing it to crash violently into the ground. Puff! A mouthful of pitch-black blood spurted out from the mummy's mouth. Its shriveled body was trembling, and its eyes were wide open. It looked at Yi Xian with extreme fear in its eyes. No. Impossible. Divine ability. It's actually a divine ability. You. What is your cultivation level? Could it be that you're that legendary great cultivator? The mummy screamed in horror. Even its body was trembling uncontrollably, because it had discovered an extremely terrifying thing. The technique Yi Xian used was a divine ability unique to the legendary great cultivators of ancient times. No. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. How can you be a great cultivator? The mummy was in a state of madness. It was simply unable to believe the truth that it had guessed. It was passed down from ancient times. In the distant past, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was abundant, and immortal cultivators were as numerous as carps crossing the river. However, there were also differences among the immortal cultivators. The true great cultivators were all people who possessed divine abilities. To be able to cultivate divine abilities, one had to be at least at the tribulation passing stage, and this also depended on one's own luck. Not every immortal cultivator at the tribulation passing stage could cultivate divine abilities. Even in the era where spiritual energy filled the sky, there were very few immortal cultivators who could cultivate divine abilities. As for people like them, they were known as great cultivators. At this moment, a living great cultivator appeared in front of the mummy. How could it not be shocked and fearful? Not to mention that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth did not exist now, even if it escaped to the outside world and devoured endless blood energy, and his own cultivation level stepped into the tribulation passing stage, it was just an ant in front of a great cultivator who possessed divine abilities. The terror of a great cultivator was definitely not just for show. They had the strength to challenge immortals. If they could ascend and become immortals, their cultivation level would be even more terrifying. Yi Xian's expression was indifferent. He quietly looked at the mummy on the ground, and there was not the slightest fluctuation in his eyes. Ever since he stepped into the middle stage of the tribulation transcendence stage and cultivated a half-immortal body, Yi Xian had naturally cultivated a few of the divine abilities in the immortal scripture. Although he wasn't proficient in using them, dealing with this little corpse was nothing more than a piece of cake. I'll give you 2 choices. Either you submit to me and be used by me, or I'll crush your primordial spirit today and make you unable to reincarnate forever. Bloody light lingered around Yi Xian, and a terrifying murderous intent flashed across his eyes. If not for the mummy's extraordinary cultivation level, Yi Xian would have killed it long ago. Why would he waste so much time entangling with it here? Submit to you. The mummy laughed bitterly, and the gaze he looked at Yi Xian with was extremely deranged. He roared ferociously, I, Yuan Su, am a holy monk of the generation, and I even founded the little thunderclap temple that lasted for thousands of years. You actually want me to submit to you? Yuan Su. Yi Xian was slightly stunned. Although he guessed that this mummy was a monk of the Little Thunderclap Temple, he did not expect the mummy's true identity to be the founder of the Little Thunderclap Temple. Although Yi Xian had never taken the Little Thunderclap Temple seriously, he knew a thing or two about the founder's name. Legend has it that thousands of years ago, when the world was about to enter the age of Dharma, there was a barefoot monk who walked the divine continent. This monk subdued demons and his Dharma was unfathomable. He even founded the Little Thunderclap Temple, which was revered by the world. The mortals of that era called him the Holy Monk. This holy monk was called Yuan Su, and he was an extremely amazing genius. In his era, this person's cultivation level had even stepped into the nascent soul stage. It was not until the age of Dharma that he passed away in the little thunderclap temple. However, Yi Xian did not expect that the ugly mummy in front of him was not only the holy monk of that era, but that it had devoured the essence of evil spirits for thousands of years, and was barely able to survive until now. If this matter were to spread to the outside world, the world would probably think it was a fantasy. Perhaps sensing Yi Xian's doubts, Yuan Su's body was surrounded by an aura of death, and a bloody light bloomed faintly. The originally shriveled body gradually became plump. After a dozen breaths of time, the terrifying mummy had disappeared, and a handsome young monk appeared before Yi Xian's eyes. Chapter 188. Although Yuan Su was dressed like a monk, the deathly aura around him was extremely dense. He was basically a monstrous evil spirit. Where was the benevolence of Buddhism? Yi Xian, you didn't expect that a holy monk of a generation would fall to such a state, did you? Yuan Su laughed miserably as he stared at Yi Xian. His eyes were filled with jealousy, venomous hatred, and a deep sense of unwillingness. When these emotions intertwined, it made Yuan Su look even more ferocious and terrifying. I, Yuan Su, am a monstrous talent and an unprecedented genius. I started practicing Buddhism at the age of 4, stepped into the Qi refining stage at the age of 14, entered the foundation establishment stage at the age of 60, reached the golden core stage at the age of 100, and finally stepped into the nascent soul stage at the age of 500. I thought that within 1,000 years, I would be able to step into the tribulation stage and transcend the heavenly tribulation with the supreme Buddhist Dharma, ascending to the legendary Earth Immortal realm. Yuan Su's face twisted as he spoke. He looked at Yi Xian with eyes filled with unimaginable jealousy and hatred. He roared, "But the world is ending and there is no path to immortality. My body is withering and my cultivation is dissipating. I can't accept this, I can't accept this. I can't accept this. I, Yuan Su, can't become a Buddha. Why must I die of old age like a mortal?" Yuan Su's eyes widened. They were filled with blood-red light, as if he had fallen into a distant memory. The fear of death made me question Buddhism. I even set my sights on the evil spirits in the demon-suppressing tower. Because their cultivation was unparalleled and they had committed heinous crimes, I swallowed their flesh and blood and forcefully suppressed their blood-spirit essence in my body to slow down the aging of my body. For thousands of years, I have been practicing the Buddhist Dharma in this dark demon-suppressing tower. That's how I managed to survive until today. As Yuan Su spoke up to hear, he looked at Yi Xian with sinister and jealous eyes. He roared, "What about you, Yi Xian? You're just a junior of this generation. I don't know what kind of opportunity you had, but you've become a tribulation stage cultivator and mastered the legendary divine arts. I can't accept this. I don't understand why a junior like you can set foot on the Tongtian path of immortality, while I, the holy monk of Yuan Su, have to submit to you?" Yuan Su roared at Yi Xian. His eyes were red and the jealousy on his face was extremely vicious. He looked at Yi Xian as if he wanted to eat Yi Xian's flesh and drink Yi Xian's blood. At this moment, Yi Xian's eyes were emotionless. He had already understood what Yuan Su had gone through. A deep look flashed across his eyes as he looked at Yuan Su. "The story is very interesting, and it also explains the sorrow of your life. Unfortunately, I, Yi Xian, am not a kind person, nor am I here to listen to your story. Since you are not willing to submit to me, then I will personally send you on your way." Wang! The void collapsed and blood soared. Yi Xian's face was cold and emotionless. His palm glowed. This was the light of the soul slaying God destroying. It could destroy Yuan Su's primordial spirit and prevent him from reincarnating. In Yi Xian's eyes, there was no such thing as friend or foe. Anyone who dared to oppose him was a dead man. There had never been an exception. Wait! Suddenly, before Yi Xian could make a move, Yuan Su spoke. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes but did not release the soul-slaying God-destroying light in his hand. Bang! Under Yi Xian's gaze, Yuan Su's vicious expression disappeared. His expression was very calm, so calm that there were no ripples. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Yi Xian. I am willing to submit to you, but you have to promise me one thing. If you ascend and become an immortal in the future and are no longer in this world, I hope that you can impart your skills to me. Yuan Su did not want to die. He really did not want to die. He had bitterly endured for thousands of years, lingering at death's door until he finally obtained the blood-chi devouring technique and could once again embark on the path of immortal cultivation. How could he be willing to die in Yi Xian's hands? The reason he roared at Yi Xian just now was to vent the unwillingness and jealousy in his heart. This was because he couldn't accept it. He, a dignified holy monk, actually had to submit to a junior from this world. However, Yuan Su was also very smart. He could recognize reality very clearly. If he did not submit to Yi Xian, he would only end up dead. In the face of the so-called choice between dignity and life, he chose life. Bang! All of a sudden. Before Yuan Su could react, a blood-red light directly slapped him away, causing him to spit out a mouthful of black blood. The Yin light and death chi that surrounded him also exploded with a bang. Yi Xian strolled over until he was in front of Yuan Su. His broad foot suddenly stomped on Yuan Su's face, continuously crushing it with force. Remember, your life is in my hands. You have no right to negotiate with me. If it weren't for the fact that you still have some use, do you think you would still be alive now? Yi Xian said sinisterly. Killing intent shot out from his eyes. As long as Yuan Su had the slightest bit of unwillingness, he did not mind killing him on the spot. In Yi Xian's eyes, while geniuses were rare, they were also wild and untamed. A disobedient genius was of no use to Yi Xian, so it was better to directly kill him. That was the best method. Yuan Su's face flushed red from being stomped on by Yi Xian. However, he could completely hear the killing intent in Yi Xian's voice. Even though he was infuriated and embarrassed, he still spoke with a trembling voice, "Moss. Master. Yuan Su was wrong. Master, please show mercy. Remember, this is the first and last time. If you have any ulterior motives, I will send you to the underworld and let you be roasted by nether flames for eternity. You will never be able to reincarnate." Yi Xian said coldly as he moved his foot away, allowing Yuan Su to quickly stand up. He did not dare to show even the slightest bit of hatred on his face. Hiss! Suddenly, a blood-red talisman shot towards Yuan Su. Before he could even dodge, the blood-red talisman had fused into the center of his forehead. It caused Yuan Su's expression to change drastically, and a wisp of despair appeared in his eyes. This is a blood-red contract. If you work for me loyally, this blood-red contract will be useless. However, if you have any ulterior motives, even if we are thousands of miles apart, I can still destroy your soul. Trust? That did not exist. Not in this lifetime. Yi Xian would never trust anyone. He deeply understood that only by controlling a person's greatest weakness would they not betray him. Take Yuan Su, for example. Thousands of years ago, he was a holy monk who had founded the Little Thunder Temple. However, he was greedy for life and afraid of death. He wanted to embark on the path to immortality. Even if he had to become a Buddha, he would not hesitate. Death was Yuan Su's greatest weakness. Yi Xian had grasped this very well and firmly controlled him. Now, leave this place with me, Yi Xian said indifferently. He turned and walked out of the demon suppression tower. Watching Yi Xian's departing figure, Yuan Su's expression was extremely complicated. In the end, he sighed and quickly chased after Yi Xian. In truth, Yuan Su's so-called submission was only a temporary measure. He was waiting for Yi Xian to let his guard down. Then, he would definitely flee. How could he truly recognize Yi Xian as his master? Chapter 189. However, Yuan Su had underestimated Yi Xian's methods. When the blood-red contract fused with his soul, he knew that he had no other choice but to become Yi Xian's servant. Outside the demon-suppressing tower, the members of the underworld were gathering. Behind Gu Beichen was a small mountain of cultivation manuals, while Fatso Huang led a group of villains and waited patiently for Yi Xian's appearance. "Sir has come out," Zhuo Junting reminded everyone. "Greetings, Lord of the Underworld." As Yi Xian walked out of the demon-suppressing tower, a large number of members of the underworld bowed. However, when they saw Yuan Su behind Yi Xian, a trace of surprise appeared in their eyes. They did not know why this monk had walked out of the demon-suppressing tower with Yi Xian. After all, after the massacre by the underworld, there were no survivors in the small Thunder Temple other than the members of the underworld. "Sir, who is he?" Fatso Huang's eyes turned as he probed Yi Xian. "Fatso Huang, teach him the rules of the underworld. From now on, this person will follow by your side," Yi Xian ordered. "I am Yuan Su." "Greetings, brothers." Yuan Su put his palms together and bowed to everyone present. Fatso Huang grinned and patted Yuan Su's shoulder affectionately. He said, "Master, those who can be valued by Sir must be extraordinary. As long as you serve Sir loyally, Sir will not treat you unfairly." Fatso Huang's eyes were sharp. He could tell that Yuan Su's cultivation was extraordinary at a glance. Yi Xian must have entered the demon-suppressing tower for this person. This made him treat Yuan Su with caution. After Yuan Su and the other members of the underworld had introduced themselves, they had officially joined the underworld. Although Yuan Su looked down on these mortals, who asked Yi Xian to be so terrifying. If he showed even the slightest bit of disdain and angered this savage, that was definitely not the result Yuan Su wanted to see. Yuan Su knew how to adapt to the situation, and this made Yi Xian very satisfied. It was also at this time that Gu Beichen came to Yi Xian and said, "Sir, the monks in this small Thunder Temple have all been killed, and all the secret cultivation manuals in the Sutra Depository have been searched. However, there are still forces like Taoism and Longhu Mountain. I'm afraid they will be extremely difficult to deal with." Gu Beichen wanted to say something but stopped himself. Clearly, if not for Yi Xian, they would not have been a match for the small Lane Temple. However, the extermination of the sect had just begun. There were many forces like the small Lane Temple in the Divine Continent. They could not always let Yi Xian do it personally, right? "We are ashamed to let Sir do it personally. We are really useless," Fatso Huang said with a red face. If Wu Juexian had not gone to the west, he could have destroyed the small Lane Temple alone. "It's because there are too few experts in the underworld." Zhuo Junting sighed. "Alright, there's no need to blame yourselves." Yi Xian also understood that the strength of the underworld was somewhat uneven. This had a lot to do with him. After all, he had just taught the people of the underworld the way of immortal cultivation. Their cultivation was still too weak. "Sir, it's just some rotten fish and shrimps. How can we trouble you? Leave this matter to me." Yuan Su stepped out from the crowd. He put his palms together and bowed to Yi Xian. Clearly, Yuan Su had just acknowledged Yi Xian as his master. He wanted to show off in front of Yi Xian. This way, he could also get closer to Yi Xian. This was also Yuan Su's smart move. Although Yuan Su's peak cultivation no longer existed and he was now only in the Golden Core realm, it was enough to deal with the forces of the Divine Continent. "Alright, I'll leave this matter to you. The members of the underworld are also at your disposal." Yi Xian nodded slowly. This was exactly what he wanted. Following a series of orders from Yi Xian, a large number of secret manuals were sent away. Yuan Su and the people of the underworld directly charged towards the next transcendental force. Meanwhile, Yi Xian returned to Jiangnan City alone. Jiangnan City. It was bustling and bustling with people. There was no longer any sign of dilapidation. Peddlers were hawking their wares. A large number of people were rebuilding their homes on both sides of the street. This gave the entire Jiangnan city a sense of prosperity. A large number of young men and women in martial attire were rushing out of the city. They had swords and sabers in their hands. Everyone's face was filled with excitement. Ever since Yi Xian spread the blood qi devouring technique to the world and printed a large number of secret manuals into books, even ordinary people could start cultivating. Killing blood soul mutated beasts could also improve one's cultivation. This also sped up the evolution of humans. Jiangnan City was the sacred city of humans. It was all because the divine king, Yi Xian, was here. The housing prices in Jiangnan City rose steadily. It could be said that every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. This made many high officials and dignitaries want to buy a house in Jiangnan City but could not. That was because money could no longer buy a house in Jiangnan City. People could only buy some ordinary daily goods. If they wanted to buy a house in Jiangnan City, they needed a blood soul mutated beast to do the transaction. A natural level mutated beast could buy a luxurious house. A foundation level mutated beast could buy a large villa. This also made all humans cultivate crazily. They not only wanted to improve their cultivation, but also wanted to settle down in Jiangnan City by hunting blood soul mutated beasts. From this, it could be seen that the people had entered an era of rapid evolution. Perhaps in 10 or 100 years, humans would no longer need to use transportation. Everyone could fly, showing a prosperous era of cultivation. In the shantytown of Jiangbei, the ground was bumpy, the dirt road was slightly muddy, and abandoned houses could be seen everywhere. There was no trace of humans. Yi Xian walked forward until he came to a slightly dilapidated house. When he pushed open the rusty iron door, a strange sound came from the narrow courtyard. Creak. The iron door opened, and Yi Xian walked in. His eyes were slightly drifting. Looking at the familiar scene in the courtyard, the corners of his mouth inadvertently outlined a nostalgic smile. Home. This was Yi Xian's home in Jiangnan City. It had the laughter of his childhood and the memories he didn't want to recall. Yi Xian walked through every corner. From time to time, he touched the broken door and picked up the toys of his childhood in the house. Until he sat at the narrow dining table, he was lost in thought. Home, it was still the same home, but the people who used to be there were no longer there. Yi Xian didn't know why he came here. Maybe he wanted to recall his life, or maybe he was reluctant to part with something. This feeling was indescribable, but it brought him back here. After half a day, Yi Xian woke up from his thoughts. His voice was calm. You've been watching for so long. It's time for you to come out. I don't understand you. Since you still miss Auntie Yi, why don't you go to the capital to see them? A weak female voice came from outside the door. She entered the room quietly, and there was confusion in her limpid eyes. Chapter 190. Yun Mengyao. She used to be a teacher of the Sky Blue Academy in Jiangnan City. She had a fairy-like face and a graceful temperament like the East. No matter if she was in ancient times or modern times, she would be a peerless beauty. However, such a graceful woman no longer had the delicate feeling she had in the past. She was dressed in white and held a 3-foot-long sword in her hand. Her hair was tied into a bun, and her skin was like carved ivory. But her stunning face was ruined by a scar, which made people feel pity when they looked at her. The scar on Yun Mengyao's face was very obvious, which ruined her delicate face. But she didn't seem to care. She just looked at Yi Xian silently, as if they were acquaintances who hadn't seen each other for many years. She didn't feel awkward at all. What's with the scar on your face? Yi Xian asked. You might not believe me, but this scar was made by me. Because of the blood soul mutant beast's rampage, my entire family died in the mouths of the mutant beasts. Although I managed to escape, there were some people who had ill intentions towards me, so I personally destroyed this face. Yun Mengyao's voice was very calm, so calm that there was no fluctuation in her voice. But Yi Xian looked at this woman deeply, and then nodded slowly. He didn't know what he was thinking. Since ancient times, appearance was very important to a woman, let alone a woman like Yun Mengyao who was so beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a city. Yi Xian didn't know what this woman had experienced all these years. But it was possible that Yun Mengyao had ruined her face with her own hands. There must be a very sad story behind it. I once went to the capital to visit Aunt Yi and Ling Er. They were a little haggard because they missed you. Yi Xian, I don't understand. If it were me, I would never abandon them. Are you really so heartless? Yun Mengyao's voice was cold. Are you preaching to me? Or are you condemning me for being heartless? Yi Xian slowly stood up and looked at the sky through the window. His voice was deep as he said, you should have seen the changes in this world. If I, Yi Xian, was just an ordinary person, I would always be by their side, but I'm not. My existence has caused countless people to stare at me. They wish they could eat my flesh and drink my blood, and they will never have a peaceful day by my side. Yun Mengyao shook her head slowly and said in a cold voice, I don't understand. With your current reputation, Divine King Yi, and the fact that you've created a new era, even those so-called deities might not be able to threaten you. What are you afraid of? Scared? Yi Xian murmured to himself. Then, he gazed in the direction of Heartbreak Mountain and said, the world you see is only the tip of the iceberg. There are still many things you don't know about in this world. Yi Xian has never been afraid. It's just that I have no way out. As long as I take a step back, it'll be a bottomless abyss. I'll die without a burial place. Yi Xian looked back at Yun Mengyao. His eyes were deep as he said, when I was young, I saw a movie about a monkey's love story. I'm sure you've seen it too. Yun Mengyao's breath stopped. She seemed to understand something. She bit her lips and murmured, if Joker wants to save Zixia, he must defeat the Bull Demon King. And to defeat the Bull Demon King, he must become Sun Wukong. To become Sun Wukong, he must cut off his emotions and desires. Can't he be with Zixia if he cuts off his emotions and desires? A look of self-mockery flashed across Yi Xian's eyes. He murmured, my enemy is too strong. If I give up on becoming an immortal and stay by my family's side regardless of everything, I'll end up in a miserable state. True protection isn't being with someone all the time. It's sheltering those who need protection. After Yi Xian finished speaking, he strolled outside. The aura around him gradually became cold and gloomy. It was as if he had turned into a heartless person once again. He gradually disappeared from Yun Mengyao's sight. Looking at Yi Xian's cold and lonely back, Yun Mengyao said bitterly, so, there's no such thing as peace and quiet. It's just that you've been carrying a burden and moving forward alone. Qingyun Villa. Yi Xian stood alone under the moon. Today, he returned to his former residence, causing waves to surge in his heart. However, these waves were quickly calmed by him, and a cold light rose from the depths of his eyes. Yuanling, are you still not going to make a move? Yi Xian looked up at the sky and murmured to himself. West, Twilight City. A bloody mist drifted in the city. A large number of buildings were broken and collapsed. Countless Westerners were crying and rushing out of the city. This was because the god they believed in was covered in blood. He was being trampled under the feet of a powerful and dark woman. Gu Xiaoxiao was wearing a black dress. Her skin was fair, and her black hair was scattered behind her head. She was smiling, but her smile was no longer as kind as before. Instead, it gave people a cold and dark feeling. A man covered in blood was surrounded by a misty bloody light. There was an immortal-like charm around him. He howled angrily under Gu Xiaoxiao's feet, but he was powerless to resist. Immortal God's remnant soul. Gu Xiaoxiao said coldly. Bright demonic light bloomed around her. She said in a cold and ruthless voice, "You're really a good-for-nothing. You've escaped from the Blood Sea battlefield for so long, but your cultivation has only just recovered to the nascent soul stage. Then, give me all your cultivation." Buzz! Her slender hand was soft and boneless, but at this time, it erupted with unimaginable power. As Gu Xiaoxiao's palm and fingers slammed down, the man under her feet instantly exploded into a ball of extremely majestic blood qi. Gu Xiaoxiao instantly devoured it. Great art of devouring the heavens and earth. Gu Xiaoxiao scolded coldly. She sat cross-legged in the void to refine the majestic blood qi in her body. Her cultivation increased rapidly. If Yi Xian was present at this time, he would definitely realize that the technique Gu Xiaoxiao was using now was a secret technique from the Immortal scripture. Half a day passed. Gu Xiaoxiao slowly opened her eyes. A bright bloody light flashed across her eyes, and the demonic light around her became more and more intense. She looked to the east, and said in a cold and ruthless voice, "Yi Xian, it won't be long before you and I meet again." The divine continent was in an uproar. Ever since Yuanqiu joined the underworld had been unstoppable. It was unknown how many transcendental forces had been wiped out. Taoism, Mount Longhu, Prajna Temple, ancient martial arts families, too many forces had been wiped out by the underworld. Their precious cultivation manuals were collected and printed into books, which were distributed to all parts of the Great Xia country by the members of the underworld. If they did not erupt in silence, they would perish in silence. The underworld's actions had finally caused these ancient forces to unite. This was because they knew that if they blindly fought alone, they would only be wiped out by the underworld one by one. Only by uniting all of their forces, they would have the power to fight even if the divine King Yi Xian was behind the underworld. It was not that these ancient forces wanted to fight to the death with the underworld. Instead, the underworld's actions had crossed their bottom line. There was no room for reconciliation. Chapter 191. It should be known that the reason why these ancient forces were able to stand above the mortals was because of the secret cultivation techniques in their sections. If everyone could practice their techniques, there would be no need for these ancient forces to exist. This would be no different from the massacre of the underworld. Whether it was Taoism or Buddhism, a large number of ancient martial arts families had finally joined forces. They issued a challenge to Yi Xian and were prepared to fight to the death. If they did not die, then Yi Xian would perish. These ancient powers all understood one thing. Fighting with these villains of the underworld wasn't a long-term thing. As long as they killed Yi Xian, the underworld would naturally collapse, and only then would they be able to continue passing on their legacy. Jiangnan City, Qingyun Lodge. Yi Xian sat high up in the main seat. Fatso Huang sat to the side. A black challenge letter was placed in front of Yi Xian. "Sir, things have gotten a little out of hand. These ancient forces have all joined forces. There are also many experts who have never been seen before. It will be difficult for the underworld to wipe them out in one fell swoop," Fatso Huang said in a low voice. "Sir, as long as you give me some time to devour the blood energy of some blood soul exotic beasts and stabilize my golden core cultivation, these mortals will definitely not be a match for me." Yuan Su put his palms together and promised Yi Xian. "Enough." Yi Xian waved his hand and motioned for everyone to keep quiet. "If we want to start a new era, we must have corpses floating in the mountains and rivers. If we don't destroy the old forces, it will only cause countless troubles," Yi Xian said calmly. "Sir, you mean?" Fatso Huang probed. "They're just some ants. Just kill them." Yi Xian seemed to be saying something very casual. However, when everyone heard it, they felt a great chill in their hearts. "Sir, are you really going to accept the challenge and personally kill these people?" Fatso Huang asked in a trembling voice. It was no wonder that Fatso Huang was worried. One had to know that the remaining forces had a large number of people. None of them were ordinary people. If they were all slaughtered, it would definitely cause an unimaginable calamity. It would also greatly damage the vitality of China. After all, ordinary people had just started cultivating, and they still needed a period of time to get used to it. Without the support of these forces, the blood-soul mutant beasts would put an enormous amount of pressure on ordinary people. But in Yi Xian's eyes, these transcendent factions were nothing more than a bunch of vermin. If humanity wanted to quickly embark on the path of evolution, they would have to destroy these old factions. Once the entire human population was trained in martial arts, these blood-soul aberrations naturally wouldn't be a threat to humanity. They're just a bunch of ants. How could they be worthy of me personally taking action? Yi Xian slowly shook his head. Then, he narrowed his eyes and looked at Fatso Huang. His voice was slightly cold as he said, "Fatso Huang, do you know why I think so highly of you even though your cultivation is only ordinary in the underworld?" Fatso Huang was stunned. He was silent for several breaths of time before a sinister smile appeared on his face. He bowed to Yi Xian and said, "Sir, you think so highly of me because my methods are vicious enough. Even if my cultivation is only ordinary, no one in the underworld can surpass me in terms of sinister methods. Then do you know what to do?" Yi Xian's eyes flashed with a look of admiration. He looked at Fatso Huang with even more satisfaction. They're just some stupid people. How dare they go against the underworld? Even if I don't use force, I will definitely make them die without a burial ground, Fatso Huang said with a strange smile. Good, I'll leave this matter to you. If you do well, you'll be the second deputy palace master of the underworld, Yi Xian said with a satisfied smile. Thank you for your guidance, sir. Fatso Huang cupped his hands and excused himself. However, the sinister look in his eyes was extremely strong. It was obvious that he had already thought of a way to deal with the remaining major factions. Sir, can this Fatso Huang really deal with these factions? Zhuo Junting asked doubtfully. If you want to kill someone, you don't need to use force. Fatso Huang's methods will definitely broaden your horizons, Yi Xian said with a smile. The world was in an uproar as discussions broke out. When the major factions joined forces and released a statement to the outside world, they claimed that Yi Xian had massacred all the cultivators in the world for no reason. His crimes were too numerous to be recorded. They even held a demon-slaying conference on Mount Luoxia under the guise of eliminating demons and defending the Tao. They would fight Yi Xian to the death in 7 days. When this news spread throughout China, the people of the state of Xia cursed at the major factions. This was because Yi Xian was a god in the hearts of the people of the state of Xia. If it weren't for Yi Xian preaching martial arts to the world, how could ordinary people like them embark on the path of cultivation and fight against the blood-soul beasts? However, this battle also attracted the attention of the world. Just as the world was wondering if Yi Xian would accept the challenge from the major factions, Fatso Huang led the members of the underworld and quietly took action. The night was like a curtain, dotted with stars. Jiangnan Arsenal. More than 10 large trucks were parked here. A large number of members of the underworld continuously moved out various high-tech weapons and loaded them into the trucks. After 4 hours, the trucks were fully loaded. The members of the underworld drove the vehicles and disappeared into the night. Biological Research Base. This was a research institute under the underworld. It was also a research site. A large number of researchers were operating sophisticated instruments. Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen stood side by side, waiting for the results of the report. Leader Huang, the substance you want has been refined. However, you have to be very careful. If this thing is released, it will definitely cause a great disaster. One of the researchers was holding a report in one hand and a small glass vial in the other. There was a faint blue liquid in the vial, and it gave off a sense of breathtaking beauty. After receiving the report and the liquid in the bottle, Fatso Huang's gloomy face finally revealed a smile. However, this smile was sinister and cruel, causing the researcher to break out in cold sweat. He hurriedly bid farewell to Fatso Huang and left. Let's go. Fatso Huang called out to Gu Beichen and led the way out of the research institute. At the foot of Mtiluoxia, there was a remote village. Because of the Blood Soul Beast's rampage, this village had long been deserted. A large number of trucks drove into the village under the cover of the night. All kinds of high-tech weapons were unloaded from the trucks until these high-tech weapons were laid out on the ground. Under the moonlight, it gave off an extremely eerie feeling. A-02 annihilation missiles, ground-to-air rocket launchers, B-21 armor-piercing missiles, and all kinds of weapons of mass destruction were piled up here. Everyone moved them carefully, afraid that a single mistake would cause a devastating disaster. In the courtyard, Fatso Huang looked around at the members of the underworld and said in an extremely cold voice, "Everyone, this time, the mission given to us by Lord Ming must not fail. If this mission fails, not only will I, Fatso Huang, have to atone for my sins with my death, all of you will not be able to live." Chapter 192. Don't worry, team leader. We will complete the mission with our lives. The members of the Mansion of the Dead spoke one after another. Everyone's eyes were filled with ruthlessness and their expressions were ferocious. Go. Plant all these weapons in Mtiluoxia. Don't let these forces know. Fatso Huang ordered coldly. He also ordered the members of the Mansion of the Dead to leave quickly with a large number of high-tech weapons. In the courtyard, Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen sat opposite each other. The small bottle with the blue liquid was placed on the table. Under the moonlight, it looked even more beautiful. Fatso Huang, what is this? Gu Beichen asked. When Gu Beichen knew that Fatso Huang was going to use high-tech weapons to eliminate these remaining forces, he was already extremely shocked. However, Gu Beichen could not understand the use of this small bottle of liquid obtained from the Biology Research Institute. Hee. Fatso Huang smiled eerily. He looked at the liquid in the bottle with an intoxicated expression. This thing has a very nice name. It's called Soul Annihilation Guide. Don't underestimate this small bottle. Even that monk Yuan Su would have to die under this thing with just one drop, let alone use it to deal with the major forces. Fatso Huang smiled eerily. Are you kidding? Yuan Su is at the golden core stage. Although his cultivation has not stabilized, how can a mortal poison hurt him? Gu Beichen exclaimed softly. Who told you that this is a mortal poison? Fatso Huang smiled proudly. I collected a large number of corpses of strange beasts. These strange beasts all have deadly poison in their bodies. I asked these researchers to extract the poison from these strange beasts and fuse them all together. After continuous purification, this is how the world's most poisonous poison appeared. Even if these high-tech weapons can't completely eliminate these forces, as long as I scatter this into the air, they will turn into a pile of white bones and die tragically in Mtiluoxia. Fatso, you're really vicious. Gu Beichen was speechless. He once again witnessed Fatso Huang's unscrupulous methods. Hee. Fatso Huang said with a sinister smile, Sir thinks so highly of me. If I can't complete the task, how can I, Fatso Huang, face him? Sunset Mountain. The sun was shining brightly, and the sky was clear for thousands of miles. Tens of thousands of people had gathered on the mountainside, each of them holding weapons like swords and sabers. They were constantly looking into the distance, waiting for Yi Xian's arrival. This was their last stand, and it was also their last stand. As long as they could kill Yi Xian, their forces could truly be passed on, and not be completely destroyed. Taoist masters, Buddhist monks, and ancient martial artists who had entered the foundation establishment stage were all outstanding talents of their respective forces. Even several peerless masters from 100 years ago had appeared here one after another in order to have the final battle with Yi Xian. Unfortunately, these people did not know that Yi Xian had never taken them seriously, and would not appear on Sunset Mountain. What awaited them was Fatso Huang's ultimate method. Everyone, although Yi Xian's cultivation is peerless, he is only one person. As long as we are united, we will definitely be able to kill this demon. A Taoist master said to boost the morale. Amitabha. A Buddhist monk clasped his hands together and chanted, "This demon wants to destroy our lineage. Today's battle is a battle to destroy the demon. Even if I die here, I will have no regrets." All sorts of impassioned words were heard, and it attracted the response of tens of thousands of people. It also caused the entire Sunset Mountain to become noisy. Whoosh whoosh! All of a sudden, an extremely terrifying sound pierced through the air. Before the major forces could react, they saw dozens of missiles with dazzling flames flying towards them from the distant horizon. Guided missiles. Retreat! Such a terrifying scene immediately caused the major forces to scream. They did not expect that not only did Yi Xian not come to Sunset Mountain to fight to the death with them, but what awaited them was a terrorist attack with firearms. Bang bang bang. Ah! Before the major forces could escape in all directions, dozens of missiles pierced through the air and directly turned the entire Sunset Mountain into a sea of fire. The terrifying heat wave from the explosion vaporized a large number of people into smoke. There were also shrill screams. "Yi Xian, get out here! You evil demon, you will die a horrible death." Dozens of peerless experts raised astral energy shields around them. They floated in the void, blocking the terrifying aftershocks of the hot weapons. But when they saw the tragic deaths of all their disciples, their faces were filled with grief, which made them roar out in anger. After an entire hour, the Sunset Mountain was in a state of desolation. It had completely turned into charcoal, and a thick burnt smell floated in the air. Other than a few dozen top experts from various major forces, tens of thousands of people had died miserably in the Sunset Mountain. Clap clap clap. There was a burst of applause, and dozens of top experts looked towards the source of the sound with bloodshot eyes. "I have to say that you people are really lucky. Even these missiles did not kill you." Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen flew over. A smug look flashed across Fatso Huang's face. "You lackey of Yi Xian, I'm going to kill you." A Foundation Establishment Realm ancient warrior roared. "Under the orders of my master, all of you must die today." A drop of blue liquid quietly merged into the air. Fatso Huang sneered eerily, and a trace of residual poison quietly flashed across his eyes. Jiangnan City, Qingyun Villa. Yi Xian was slightly lazy as he leaned against the soft sofa. Hu Junting stood beside him, her face slightly pale. She was reporting something to Yi Xian. "You mean to say that Wu Juexian has gone missing in the west?" Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. "Yes, not only has Wu Juexian gone missing, but our members of the Mansion of the Dead in the west are also uncontactable. According to the information from the peripheral members, the last time they saw Wu Juexian was when she was leading the members of the Mansion of the Dead to Moon God City," Hu Junting quickly said. "Okay, I understand. You can go now." Yi Xian's face was calm as he asked Hu Junting to turn and leave. Moon God City. Interesting. Let me see how powerful this so-called Moon God is. Yi Xian said deeply as a trace of light flashed across his eyes. At the same time, Moon God City in the west. The so-called Moon God was sitting on a white bone throne. Her body was covered in a purple gold black robe. Through the black robe, her eyes were looking at the land in the east. "Yi Xian, I'll be waiting for your arrival." A trace of moonlight rose around her, but there was a trace of blood in her eyes. Her voice was slightly muffled. Chapter 193. The old forces had been destroyed, and a new era had arrived. When the remaining major forces had been reduced to dust, a large number of secret cultivation manuals had spread throughout the Xia country. From then on, no one in this world would be able to stop the evolution of mankind. Jiangnan City, Qingyun Villa. Fatso Huang was flushed with success because he had completed the task given to him by Yi Xian. He had officially become the second deputy palace master of the underworld. He was second only to one person and above all. When the members of the underworld cast envious gazes at Fatso Huang, it made Fatso Huang feel even more smug. He had followed Yi Xian for such a long time. Although his cultivation level was average in the underworld, he was highly regarded by Yi Xian. Furthermore, he was able to become the deputy palace master of the underworld. This was also Yi Xian's affirmation of him. A banquet was held in Qingyun Villa. A large number of members of the underworld had gathered. Fatso Huang was completely drunk and his face was flushed red. He even hugged Gu Beichen's shoulder and burst into tears at the table. "Beichen, do you know? I used to be a surgeon. I used to have a pair of adorable children and a beautiful wife. I should have lived a happy life. Fatso Huang, you've drunk too much." Gu Beichen patted him on the shoulder and said, "No. I didn't drink too much. I really didn't drink too much. Listen to me. Listen to me." Fatso Huang smiled sadly. It was as if he wanted to use his drunken state to vent all the things that had been bottled up in his heart for many years. At this moment, the members of the underworld were originally toasting each other and the atmosphere was extremely lively. However, when they saw Fatso Huang's expression, everyone gradually fell silent. Even Yi Xian put down his wine glass and quietly listened to Fatso Huang's story. "My name is Huang Yukai. My nickname is Fatso Huang because I have a big appetite since I was young. I have been fat since the day I became sensible." Fatso Huang's face was full of tears as if he was immersed in a distant memory. He murmured, "Because I was fat, because I was ugly, I had low self-esteem, really low self-esteem. Even when I went to university, I never fell in love, let alone a girl who liked me. Until that day. I saw her, the woman I loved the most in my life. She is called Chu Xue. She is the most beautiful woman in our department. When I first saw her, I knew that I, Huang Yukai, must marry her in this life. For the first time, I mustered up the courage to desperately pursue this girl. Although I knew that I was ugly and poor, and she would not like me at all, and I was even mocked by my classmates as a toad who wanted to eat swan meat, I didn't care. I really didn't care because I really liked her. During the 4 years of university life, I was like a mangy dog that followed her around. No matter if it was windy or rainy, or if it was freezing cold, as long as she needed me, I would appear in front of her immediately. But until the day we parted ways after graduation, she was never willing to be my girlfriend. When Fatso Huang said this, his face was full of bitterness. He murmured, "But I was not disappointed because I knew that I was not worthy of her. I even wished her to find someone she liked in the future. After graduating from university, I transferred all my feelings for her to work. In just 1 year, I became a chief physician in a hospital. Until one day, a year later, she suddenly appeared in front of me. She said that she wanted to marry me and asked me if I would marry her. The sudden happiness made my eyes brim with tears. I nodded desperately and shouted that I would. We got married in a flash. That day was also the happiest day of my life, Fatso Huang. In less than 3 months, her belly was already bulging. I knew that I was going to be a father. Although the child in her belly was not mine, I was willing to raise the mother and child. I was even willing to take care of them for the rest of my life. When Fatso Huang said this, his face was full of happiness. However, the members of the underworld slowly inhaled as if they had already guessed the story that was going to follow. They sighed. However, one day, 2 years later, I returned home from a business trip. I wanted to give her a surprise in advance. I even bought her and our child's favorite gift. When he said this, the happiness on Fatso Huang's face was no longer there. His expression became ferocious and twisted, as if he had turned into a wild beast that was choosing a person to devour. When I pushed open the door, I saw her in bed with another man. Even when she saw me, there was no trace of guilt on her face. Instead, she put on her clothes in an extremely cold manner and told me that she wanted to divorce me. A line of clear tears flowed from Fatso Huang's eyes, causing the members of the underworld to fall silent. However, a strong murderous intent filled everyone's body. Obviously, due to the story that Fatso Huang had told, a great deal of hostility rose in their hearts. I cried bitterly. I knelt down and begged her, hoping that she would not leave me. However, she told me that she had never liked me and that the biological father of the child was the man in her bed. This man was the young master of a multinational corporation. He was richer and more powerful than me. He kicked me to the ground and hugged the woman I loved. He told me that I was just a spare tire and a complete piece of trash. When Fatso Huang said this, his face was ferocious and terrifying. However, his eyes were blurred by tears. His voice was extremely venomous and cold as he said, I hated myself for being useless. I hated my cowardice and incompetence. I raised my hand and slashed down with a knife. Like a madman, I tore this adulterous couple into pieces. I even buried this ignorant and foolish love of mine with my own hands. Fatso Huang suddenly picked up the wine bowl and gulped down the strong liquor. However, the pain and grief on his face could not be numbed with alcohol. The hanging mirror department arrested me. The Supreme Court convicted me. I was thrown into the prison. What awaited me was the death penalty. I don't regret killing this adulterous couple, but I'm not willing to die like this. Bang! All of a sudden, Fatso Huang suddenly knelt down on the ground. Tears streamed down his face and his face was red. He kowtowed 3 times to Yi Xian in a row. Sir, you saved me when I was at my most helpless. Without your appearance, I'm afraid that I, Fatso Huang, would have already gone to hell. Therefore, I, Fatso Huang, swear to God that I will never be a good person again. I will become your dog, a mad dog. I will tear apart all the enemies in front of you for you. Fatso Huang roared loudly. Tears rolled down his face, proving how emotional he was. A jade-like hand helped Fatso Huang up. Yi Xian said in a cold and harsh voice, You have never been my dog. You are my brother. No matter when, as long as I, Yi Xian, am alive, I will ensure your safety. As Yi Xian finished speaking, a large number of members of the underworld knelt down and kowtowed to Yi Xian. Their voices resounded throughout the Qingyun courtyard. Thank you for saving our lives, sir. We will never betray you. If we violate this oath, we will be punished by the heavens and earth. Chapter 194. That night in Emerald Cloud Compound, all the members of Underworld had completely let go of themselves. They had their arms around each other's shoulders, they toasted each other, some were laughing wildly while others were crying loudly. Each of them was telling their own story, as if they were immersed in those distant memories. They laughed and laughed until they cried. They cried and laughed until they fell drunk on the ground and fell into a deep sleep. In the courtyard, a waning moon hung high in the sky. A gentle breeze blew, causing Yi Xian's black hair to flutter in the wind. He stood alone under the moon as he looked up at the blue dome of heaven. His eyes were deep and lonely. No one knew what he was thinking. Today, Fatso Huang had revealed his true feelings, allowing Yi Xian to see another side of the members of Underworld. Every one of them was a pitiful person but also a hateful person. They had committed heinous crimes and were cruel and merciless. Their hands were stained with the blood of countless people and they bore the burden of countless lives. However, it was this group of vicious and evil people who had truly pledged their loyalty to him today. If it was said that Yi Xian had used death to threaten them before these members of the underworld could be used by him, but today, Yi Xian knew that they no longer needed his coercion. This was because they truly treated him as a part of the underworld and treated the underworld as their own home. Yi Xian admitted that he was a vicious person who would exterminate an entire family at the slightest disagreement. He had given everyone in Underworld the impression that he was a tyrant. the members of Underworld feared him. They were even more cautious in front of him. However, today, Yi Xian saw a light in their eyes that he had never seen before. This light was called reverence, this light was called worship, and a blazing fire appeared in the eyes of everyone in hell. It was only today that Yi Xian understood a principle. It turned out that he had unknowingly given all the members of Underworld a home, and this home was what they had to protect. Yi Xian believed that if he left this world one day, Underworld would continue to pass on its legacy even without his existence. This was the belief that a home would bring to all the members of Underworld. That night, Yi Xian stood alone under the moon and did not cultivate. When the sun rose the next day, a ray of morning light from the east shone on his face, causing him to smile and wake up from his contemplation. Yesterday's uproar had passed and all the members of Underworld had woken up with a hangover. They did not mention last night's incident, but the look in their eyes was different from before. When they left, they took a deep look at the azure cloud compound and imprinted Yi Xian's image in their minds. Then, they once again turned into a group of vicious people to complete the mission that Yi Xian had given them. Jiangnan Airport. A private jet was docked here. Fatso Huang and Zhuo Junting bowed to one side. Sir, why don't I accompany you to Moon God City? Although I can't help you much in terms of cultivation, I can save you from having to deal with some trivial matters, Fatso Huang said softly. Yes, sir. Fatso Huang is reliable. With him by your side, we can rest assured, Zhuo Junting advised. Yi Xian slowly shook his head and said, Jiangnan is the headquarters of Underworld. I can only rest assured if the two of you are there. Wu Juexian's cultivation is comparable to a golden core stage cultivator. The only ones who can make him disappear for no reason are these so-called gods. This moon god in the west is the most suspicious. Even if you go with me, you won't be of much help. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Fatso Huang and Zhuo Junting also knew that this was the truth. These so-called gods were extremely powerful. They were just some mortals. If they really followed Yi Xian to the west, they might become a burden to Yi Xian. When the two of them understood this, they stopped pleading with Yi Xian. It was also at this time that Yi Xian boarded the plane. The plane roared as it rushed into the sky and headed west. In the boundless sea of sand, in the vast desert, the scorching sun shone on the land. From time to time, human skeletons could be seen lying in the sand. Camels, off-road vehicles, and a large number of Western people were traveling in the desert in various means of transportation. In addition to these means of transportation, there were also people walking in the desert. The skin color of these Westerners varied, but without exception, all of them looked extremely haggard. However, there was a hint of hope in their eyes, which made them hurry through the desert. Logically speaking, this vast desert was extremely short of water. There were also natural dangers like sandstorms. From time to time, there would be blood soul mutant beasts lurking in the desert, ruthlessly devouring humans. With all these factors added together, the chances of humans surviving were extremely slim. However, these Western humans still continued to head towards the depths of the desert in droves. This was because there was a holy city in the depths of the desert, and this holy city was called Moon God City. As long as they could enter Moon God City, they would receive the protection of the Moon God and would never be slaughtered by the blood soul mutant beasts again. This was why so many Westerners ignored their own safety and went into the desert. Yi Xian was dressed in black and had a pure oriental face. He was walking into the desert with the crowd, attracting the attention of many Westerners. Although there weren't many Westerners in the desert, there were still some who could be seen. However, Yi Xian, this oriental man, was too strange. Not only did he not take any means of transportation, but he also didn't carry any water with him. How did he survive walking in the desert for such a long time? When this question filled the hearts of every Westerner, the way they looked at Yi Xian became even stranger. Hey, Brother Dongfang, do you want water? It's only $30,000. A white man with a rough build and a long and narrow scar on his face shouted at Yi Xian. He was wearing camouflage clothes, with a military knife and a military pistol at his waist. There were also many water bags hanging on his back. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't even bother to look at this white man. He followed the crowd and walked forward, because he could already faintly see a vast city faintly discernible in the desert in front of him. "Fuck, you damn Oriental pig, I'm talking to you. Can't you hear me?" The white man shook his head and clenched his fists and fingers together. An explosive sound came from his finger bones as he walked towards Yi Xian. His gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with greed. "Oh, damn Radov, are you trying to rob these Oriental people again?" A black man laughed loudly, as if he could already foresee Yi Xian's tragic end. "Sigh, this Oriental man is in trouble. The holy city is right in front of him, but these mercenaries have their eyes on him. If he doesn't hand over his money, I'm afraid he'll die here." A white woman leaned in her husband's arms and looked at Yi Xian with pity in her eyes. "That's enough, Millis. This has nothing to do with us. These mercenaries originally lived in Moon God City. They travel back and forth in the desert every day just to rob these Oriental people. Let's hurry up and leave," the white man warned in a low voice. Chapter 195. At the same time. When the young men and women from the east saw this scene, their faces were filled with fear. They called their companions and hurried toward Moon God City. Obviously, they had no intention of helping Yi Xian. These young men and women from the east could not be blamed for being so heartless. Although Yi Xian was also from the east, Moon God City was right in front of him. If he got into a conflict with these mercenaries just to help a stranger and lost his life here, wouldn't the gains outweigh the losses? "Eastern pig, your rudeness has angered me. I want you to compensate me with $50,000. Do you hear me?" The white man pretended to be ferocious. He took out his gun and pointed it at Yi Xian while roaring fiercely. "Are you talking to me?" The clamor of an ant made Yi Xian frown slightly. To be honest, it would dirty his hands if he had to kill such a flea with his own hands. "Fuck, you Eastern pig. Take out all your money." Looking at Yi Xian's fearless face, the white man felt insulted. He roared fiercely and smashed the butt of his gun at Yi Xian's forehead with all his might. When everyone saw this scene, they all shook their heads helplessly. Everyone could predict that in the next moment, this young man from the east would bleed profusely and be robbed of all his money by this white man from the west. Crack! Suddenly, a crisp sound was heard. An extremely terrifying scene appeared before everyone's eyes. A large number of people who were rushing to Moon God City turned pale. Their eyes widened as they stared at the scene in front of them in a daze. Yi Xian's jade-like palm was strangling the white man's neck. Under an extremely terrifying force, the man's neck was twisted irregularly. Blood kept flowing out from the corner of his mouth. His eyes rolled back, and the gun in his hand had already fallen to the ground. His limbs kept twitching, and it was obvious that he was not going to survive. Pfft! However, this was not the end. Yi Xian's eyes were gloomy. He gently spat out a blood-red light from his palm and covered the white man. Then, with a loud bang, the man exploded into a cloud of blood and no longer existed in this world. Yi Xian was not moved at all after killing the white man. Instead, there was a hint of disgust in his eyes. Personally killing such an ant was definitely not something Yi Xian wanted to do. Woo! Yi Xian's palm and fingers swept the air. A gust of wind blew the blood away as if he had done something very casual. But when the Westerners saw this scene, they immediately screamed. Noisy! The ear-piercing screams made Yi Xian frown. His voice was slightly cold, and it instantly made the Westerners cover their mouths, not daring to scream anymore. However, they looked at Yi Xian with extreme fear in their eyes. Some of the strong mercenaries originally wanted to watch a good show. However, when the white man died tragically at Yi Xian's hands, they could already see that this Asian youth was not a lamb. He was simply an evil dragon. Without saying a single word, the mercenaries nervously glanced at Yi Xian before directly running towards Moon God City. It was obvious that this kind of superhuman wasn't something they could resist. Yi Xian did not stop the mercenaries from escaping. He had no interest in chasing after a few ants. He ignored the frightened gazes of the Westerners and headed toward Moon God City in the sandstorm. This big brother, are you from the Great Xia? A weak female voice sounded in Yi Xian's ears. Among the several Eastern youths, there was a young girl looking at Yi Xian with a hopeful expression. It was obvious that these words came from the young girl's mouth. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not even look at the young girl. His footsteps did not stop as he walked toward Moon God City. Lingling, let's not get involved with this person. Moon God City is right in front of us. We'll be safe once we enter the city. Those mercenaries will definitely not let him go, one of the Eastern youths advised in a low voice. That's right. Moon God City is not far away. We'll probably reach it in about 10 miles. Let's hurry, another youth urged. The Eastern girl named Lingling quickly nodded. Clearly, her companion's advice was correct. The group quickly rushed toward Moon God City. The wind and sand filled the sky, whistling. Yi Xian was traveling alone the entire time. Be it the Westerners or the Eastern youths, they all maintained a certain distance from him. Evidently, the scene earlier on had caused them to be fearful of Yi Xian. Save me. All of a sudden. In front of them, a black mercenary turned back. His entire body was covered in blood, and he had lost an arm. He was running toward them in a wretched state. Beast stampede! Beast stampede! The black mercenary screamed in fear. Behind him, the sandstorm was rolling toward him, accompanied by the horrifying roars of beasts. That brutal blood-red aura was rolling out like a tidal wave, causing the faces of these humans to turn pale. Run! Run! None of them had expected that there would be a beast stampede when they were only a few miles away from Moon God City. Everyone's eyes were filled with despair as they ran in all directions, hoping to escape this calamity. But it was a pity that these humans were just mere mortals. Even if some of them had cultivated some martial arts, how could they escape from the beast stampede? Thousands of exotic beasts with the heads of lions and the bodies of leopards galloped over, their eyes filled with cruelty and brutality. When the thousands of exotic beasts surrounded the humans, they let out excited howls from their mouths. Roar! In the face of food, the beast stampede went completely berserk. There was no such thing as foreplay as opening their mouths wide and tearing at the humans. Arg! I don't want to die. Save me. Someone save me. A large number of horrified cries rang out as more and more Westerners died in the mouths of the beasts. Their fresh blood dyed the yellow sand red. The sight of the beasts devouring their flesh was enough to make one's soul leave their bodies. The massacre continued as the beasts howled. A large number of Westerners died tragically in the desert, turning the entire place into a bloody feast for the beasts. What should we do? What should we do? A number of Eastern youths were retreating slowly. Their faces were filled with an indescribable fear as a sense of despair spread through them. All of a sudden, the Eastern girl's eyes lit up as she abruptly looked in Yi Xian's direction. The next scene caused her despairing eyes to shine with an extremely bright light. Look over there, the girl pointed at Yi Xian, and the Eastern youths hurriedly looked over at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian was still strolling forward in the sandstorm. The beasts in front of him were trembling, and all of them were prostrating on the ground, not daring to get up. It was as if they were afraid of Yi Xian. The Eastern youths were overjoyed at this scene. The girl even cried out to Yi Xian for help, "Big brother, please save us." All of a sudden, Yi Xian stopped in his tracks and looked back at the Eastern youths. His eyes were cold and emotionless as he said, "Give me a reason. Why should I save you?" Chapter 196. Looking at Yi Xian's cold attitude, the Eastern girl's face turned pale. However, she still put on a bitter expression and begged with a trembling voice, "Big brother, please save us on account that we are all from the Xia kingdom of the East." Yi Xian smiled when he heard the girl's words. However, his smile was still cold. He said calmly, "Since we are all from the Xia kingdom, why didn't you help me earlier?" After Yi Xian finished speaking, he didn't look at the Eastern youths anymore and continued walking towards Moon God City. This made the Eastern youths' faces turn pale, and their hearts were filled with great regret. That's right. Didn't they just sit back and watch when the white mercenaries attacked Yi Xian? Now that these Eastern youths realized that Yi Xian wasn't an ordinary person, they were begging for Yi Xian's help. Yi Xian wasn't so benevolent as to care about their lives. "Let's go. Follow him. Even if he doesn't save us, these exotic beasts might not harm us as long as we follow behind him," one of the youths quickly said. The others quickly nodded and chased after Yi Xian. The slaughter continued, and the roars of the exotic beasts continued. In just a short period of time, all the Western humans had been killed by the exotic beasts. The Eastern youths maintained a certain distance from Yi Xian, walking forward fearfully in the midst of the exotic beasts. As expected, these exotic beasts are very afraid of this person. The Eastern girl's face lit up with joy. Her originally fearful heart relaxed a little. She realized that when they followed behind Yi Xian, although the exotic beasts were staring at them ferociously, they didn't do anything. It was obvious that they were wary of Yi Xian's existence. Roar! A large number of ferocious beasts roared, and something unexpected happened. A large number of exotic beasts moved their powerful limbs and tried to surround the Eastern youths. Their ferocious eyes looked at Yi Xian from time to time. When the exotic beasts realized that Yi Xian had no intention of helping them, an extremely ferocious aura bloomed from their bodies. Roar! Ferocious and savage, the exotic beasts pounced forward and tore one of the Eastern youths to shreds. This scene made the rest of them scream and run frantically towards Yi Xian. Unfortunately, before they could catch up to Yi Xian, the exotic beasts blocked their path. Obviously, the exotic beasts could tell that the Eastern youths weren't companions with that terrifying human. Big brother, I beg you, please save us." The Eastern girl was like a pear blossom blossoming in tears. Her face was extremely pale, and she was crying, begging Yi Xian. Of the exotic beasts were Yi Xian and the Eastern youths. The Eastern youths were where girl were, at that time of the exotic beasts, and ferocious exotic beasts, and ferocious beasts ferocious and miserable, horrifying, and horrified, Yi of the exotic beasts of the face of their lives. Yi of the Yi. Yi of course, Yi, Yi of herds Yi. Moon God City. If one were to call it a city, it would be more accurate to call it a modified oasis in the middle of a desert. Black city walls surrounded the city on all sides. A plaque with golden words on a black background hung above the city gates. The words, Moon God, were written on it. Several guards were standing guard in front of the city gates. They were of different races, with either black or white skin. Some of them were Asian, too. Facing the exotic beasts roaring in the distance, the guards didn't show any fear on their faces. It was as if they were used to such a sight, and they didn't feel anything. They knew that the exotic beasts didn't dare to invade Moon God City at all. It was because a true God lived in the city, and that God was also their lifelong faith. "I'm afraid many people are going to die with the appearance of the exotic beasts this time," an Eastern man said with a sigh. "Since they want to enter Moon God City, they should be prepared to die. Only the most devout believers are worthy of Lord Moon God's protection," a Caucasian man said with a chuckle. "Look, what's that?" Just as the guards were talking, one of the black guards spoke up with a trembling voice. Everyone was startled and looked in the direction the black guard was pointing. Amidst the sandstorm, a slender figure was walking towards Moon God City. Behind this person, a large number of exotic beasts were running in the desert, but they kept a great distance from this figure. Oh, God damn it, how did he survive the beast tide? Who is this guy? Shush, this person isn't simple. The guards spoke up one after another. At this moment, Yi Xian had already arrived in front of the city gates. Yi Xian's black hair fell behind his head. His Asian face, coupled with his handsome features, made him look a little weak. However, in the eyes of the guards, they didn't dare treat Yi Xian as an ordinary person. May I know where this sir came from, and what business do you have in our moon god city? One of the eastern guards turned his eyes and cupped his fists at Yi Xian, greeting him and indirectly asking about Yi Xian's background. Go and tell your so-called moon god that Yi Xian is here to visit. Tell her to come out and meet me. Yi Xian directly stated his purpose of visit, not bothering to hide it at all. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the guards' expressions changed. A cold glint flashed across their eyes as they looked at Yi Xian. Impudent! How dare you call a god by her name? A white guard was the first to raise his voice. Obviously, how could a mere mortal call the moon god by her name? Don't think that you can disrespect the moon god just because your cultivation is high and you managed to survive the beast tide, the black guard growled. The atmosphere was tense, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. A few of the city guards were about to attack if they didn't agree with each other. This caused Yi Xian to frown slightly. He never thought that there would be so many ants chattering endlessly with him when he first arrived at Moon God City. "And my lord? You're Yi Xian?" An eastern man asked in a trembling voice. He looked at Yi Xian with bewilderment in his eyes. It was obvious that he had a terrifying guess about Yi Xian's identity. Ta, ta, ta. Just as the eastern man was about to continue testing Yi Xian, he heard the sound of trembling footsteps coming from within the city. Over 1,000 black-robed people were rushing toward the city gate. It's the moon god guards. The eastern man cried out in surprise. He hurriedly ordered his companions to make way. Zilin greets Lord Divine King. In just a few breaths of time, the 1,000 moon god guards stood on both sides of the city gate. A young girl dressed in purple arrived in front of Yi Xian and bowed to him. She had beautiful purple hair, fair skin, and a pair of purple eyes. When the young girl smiled, she gave off an ethereal yet elegant aura. Moon God City welcomes the Divine King. The 1,000 moon god guards bowed. Their voices resounded through the clouds. Yi Xian's expression was calm as he looked at this scene. However, he was becoming more and more curious about this moon god. Ever since Yi Xian entered this desert, he could sense the moon god's presence. Naturally, the moon god could sense his presence as well. Furthermore, Yi Xian discovered something very interesting. This moon god's cultivation was only at the severed soul stage. However, she was extremely bold in using her divine sense to probe his cultivation. This caused Yi Xian's lips to curl into a cruel sneer. Chapter 197. Yi Xian asked himself. He was not a guest of Moon God City, yet the Moon God had arranged such a welcoming ceremony for him. He had no idea what the Moon God was up to. Your Excellency Divine King, the Moon God respectfully welcomes you at the Moon God Palace. This way, please. The young girl, Zilin, smiled and led the way for Yi Xian. From the beginning to the end, Yi Xian did not say a word. Instead, he strolled into Moon God City under Zilin's guidance. As Yi Xian entered the Moon God City, the faces of the city guards turned deathly pale. They all collapsed to the ground, their backs drenched in cold sweat. As they looked at Yi Xian's back, they revealed expressions of extreme fear. He's the Eastern Divine King. The male Eastern guard trembled as he spoke, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. As for the other guards, their bodies were trembling. They were secretly glad that they managed to keep their lives. If they had attacked Yi Xian just now, they would have turned into cold corpses by now. In Moon God City. Western European-style buildings and Eastern palaces and pavilions intertwined. When the two styles of Eastern and Western architecture intertwined, it did not give off a strange feeling. Instead, it looked extremely harmonious. The clean and tidy streets were bustling with people. Humans of all colors were whispering to each other. When Yi Xian entered the city, this was the scene he saw. "Hey, I heard that this person is the Eastern Divine King." "Pfft, Divine King. I think you've taken the wrong medicine. Other than our Lord Moon God, how can there be any real deities in this world? You can't say that. Rumor has it that this Divine King Yi is extremely terrifying. Ever since he was born, he has never been defeated. I think this Divine King Yi doesn't come with good intentions. Don't you remember? A few months ago, his subordinates entered Moon God's city and seemed to be searching for someone. A great battle even broke out in Moon God's city. If Moon God hadn't intervened, these people would have torn Moon God's city apart. There were all kinds of discussions coming from both sides of the street. Yi Xian squinted his eyes, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. It seemed that Wu Juexian and the others had been imprisoned by the Moon God. The Moon God was simply courting death for daring to imprison Yi Xian. An hour passed. Under Violet Lin's guidance, Yi Xian's group finally arrived at the center of Moon God City. At the same time, a strange scene appeared before Yi Xian's eyes. A black stone palace floated in the void. Gentle moonlight bloomed on the palace, and a vast divine aura emanated from the palace. It gave people a great sense of oppression. The moonlight bridge stretched down until it reached Yi Xian's feet. Yi Xian smiled contemptuously. He stepped onto the moonlight bridge and slowly walked toward the Moon God Palace. Moon God Palace. The black stone door was wide open, and there were black-robed people standing on both sides. When Yi Xian walked into the Moon God Palace, the scene that greeted him made Yi Xian squint his eyes. In the palace. It was dark and silent. A slender figure stood in the palace. Her body was covered by a purple-gold-black robe, and there was gentle moonlight around her. A red light flashed in her eyes as she stared quietly at Yi Xian. "Yi Daoyu, do you know that according to my original plan, I was going to kill you here and then devour your cultivation? Then, I could return to the Earth God realm and see you. But now, I've changed my mind." The Moon God's voice was a little hoarse, and no one could tell whether she was a man or a woman. But when she looked at Yi Xian, there was a strange look in her eyes. "Oh, you think you can kill me?" A strange smile appeared on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. He slowly walked forward until he arrived in front of the Moon God. When he opened and closed his eyes, a bloody light flashed through them. His voice was calm as he said, "I don't like to talk to people who hide their heads and tails. Shouldn't you reveal your true body?" Under the purple-gold-black robe, the Moon God's eyes narrowed slightly. Her voice was a little charming. "I'm afraid that you will fall in love with me when you see my face. Do you really want to see me?" "Oh. Then I'd like to see it." Yi Xian sneered. A slender hand pulled off the purple-gold-black robe, and a woman in a white palace dress appeared in front of Yi Xian. She was smiling at Yi Xian. 10,000 years in a glance. Time stopped. When the Moon God's face appeared in front of him, Yi Xian's body stiffened. Even his breathing became a little difficult. He was completely stunned, as if his soul had left his body. The so-called Moon Goddess was dressed in a white veil. Her exquisite body was emitting gentle moonlight. Her skin was as translucent as jade, and her face was so beautiful that it was impossible to describe it with words. It was as if all living things in the world would be overshadowed by her. Yi Xian admitted that he had never been interested in women. Even if a woman was in front of him, he would not take a second look. That was because there was only the Tong Tian Wei in his heart. There was no room for anything else. But the Moon God in front of him made his heart churn. There was no seduction or seduction. The Moon Goddess had an otherworldly temperament. Under the moonlight, she gave off a cold and lonely feeling. Even the fairies of the 9 heavens would feel inferior in front of her. Yi Xian could not describe the moon god's beauty with words. But his heart was beating violently, and his eyes were filled with infatuation. This feeling of being moved made Yi Xian panic. Terrifying, too terrifying. Yi Xian could not calm down from the moon god's appearance. His heart was telling himself that he had to obtain this woman and fiercely dominate her. He would not allow anyone else to touch her. Seeing Yi Xian's infatuated expression, the moon god covered her mouth and chuckled. Her voice was ethereal and filled with a celestial charm. She said, "Then let me perform a dance for you. Please enjoy." Clang! It was as if the strings of the 9 heavens were being plucked. It was also as if a beautiful celestial melody was being played. The world suddenly changed, and an extremely mystical scene appeared before Yi Xian's eyes. In the misty celestial clouds, celestial qi rose. A waning moon hung in the sky. Under the moonlight, the moon god danced in the celestial clouds. Her long sleeves danced like a fairy under the moon. Her otherworldly face was smiling at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian stared at the moon god's dance in a daze. He wanted to calm down from the moon god's dance, but his restless heart made it impossible for him to calm down. His heart was telling him that he had to obtain this woman. A celestial melody sounded like it came from the 9 heavens. The moon god's dance slowly stopped, and the strange scene around them disappeared. Yi Xian's eyes were filled with infatuation as if he had lost his soul. The 6 desires are emotionless, and the heaven and earth have no heart. Suddenly, Yi Xian's eyes focused. He fiercely bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of essence blood. His face instantly turned pale, and he finally closed his eyes. He then sat cross-legged on the ground and madly channeled the undying immortal scripture to forcefully suppress the restless emotions in his heart. Ha ha ha! Looking at Yi Xian's pale face, the moon god covered her mouth and chuckled. A trace of pride flashed through her eyes. It's useless. Even if you cultivate the undying immortal scripture, you can't suppress the love you have for me in your heart. This is not your heart's demon causing trouble, but the truest feelings in your heart, the moon god said coldly. Chapter 198. The 6 desires are merciless, the heavens and the earth are heartless, the heavens are buried and the earth is destroyed, only I am supreme. The blood light around Yi Xian turned into a demonic light, and an extremely terrifying fluctuation bloomed around him. His face was twisted and ferocious, and he was trying his best to suppress his restless mind. Man, why are you doing this? Looking at Yi Xian's twisted and terrifying face, Moon Goddess sighed. She looked at the bright moon in the sky, and there was an indescribable sadness in her eyes. She murmured, "Not to mention that you are a mere mortal, even the gods and Buddhas in the heavens would fall head over heels for your beauty. Do you know that even the supreme being in charge of the 3 realms in the earth god realm could not extricate himself from her beauty? How can you compare to that supreme being? Her beauty can confuse the heavens and the earth, and make the gods fall head over heels for her." "There has never been an exception to this," Moon Goddess said bitterly, as if she had fallen into a distant memory. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, and the demonic light around him was dazzling. He did not wake up for a long time. Moon Goddess woke up from her thoughts and walked toward Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian with a strange light in her eyes. "Don't resist anymore. Submit to me." Moon Goddess touched Yi Xian's face, and her voice was ethereal and cold. It was as if she had foreseen Yi Xian's end. "Barry!" All of a sudden, a cold roar came from Yi Xian's mouth. He suddenly opened his eyes, and the black pupils in his eyes disappeared. When his eyes opened and closed, they were ghastly white. It was eerie and terrifying at first glance. He was staring at Moon Goddess in front of him. Bang! Without waiting for the moon goddess to react, Yi Xian's palm violently struck the moon goddess's chest, sending her flying. A mouthful of blood essence sprayed out from the moon goddess's mouth and fiercely smashed onto the ground. At this moment, Tongtian's demonic light covered Yi Xian. He stared at the moon god's face as a terrifying aura of violence erupted from his body. The entire moon god temple shook violently as the void was being destroyed and reconstructed. It was as if it would collapse at any moment. Impossible. How did you wake up? Seeing Yi Xian's terrifying demonic aura and the whites of his eyes that had lost their black pupils, Moon God cried out in shock. She clearly could not understand why Yi Xian had not lost himself in her face. Vast, frost, immortal. Yi Xian paused between each word. Even his voice was trembling slightly, proving that he had just experienced a terrible situation. As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, the moon goddess's expression greatly changed. Her pupils slightly constricted as she looked at Yi Xian with an expression of extreme shock. You. How do you know about the moon fairy? At this moment, Yi Xian's demonic light shone brightly as he released a merciless aura. His voice was cold as he said, other than the legendary moon fairy of the earth immortal realm, who else could have such a face? Unfortunately, a fake is still a fake. Although you have transformed into the appearance of the moon fairy, you are still not her. If the moon fairy's real body was here, perhaps I would have died here. Ha ha ha. Moon goddess wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and laughed again. She said, Yi Dao Yu is indeed determined. But how did you know that I was a fake? Because the moon fairy does not know how to laugh. Yi Xian's simple words instantly caused the moon goddess to be stunned on the spot. Even her body was slightly trembling. She bit her lips tightly and didn't recover for a full 10 breaths of time. It was also at this moment that the moonlight around her slightly bloomed. When the light dissipated, a beautiful woman appeared before Yi Xian's eyes. The woman was very beautiful, but compared to the moon fairy's face, it was like the difference between a firefly and the moon. She could not move people's hearts. Yes, a fake is still a fake. How can I compare to my master? Moon goddess smiled bitterly. Her aura was somewhat sad. How dare you mess with my mind, you little bastard. Go to hell. Yi Xian's eyes blossomed with a bloody light. He could see through all illusions, see the essence of things, and directly see the moon god's true body. An extremely terrifying killing intent flashed through his eyes, and when he punched out, it violently smashed towards the moon god. Yi Dao Yu, my cultivation level has already recovered to the spirit-severing stage. You can't kill me. Moon goddess's face turned cold. The moonlight around her merged with the bloody light. When she slapped out with her slender hand, a bloody moon appeared and attacked Yi Xian. Boom! The two extremely powerful forces suddenly collided and instantly turned the moon goddess palace into ashes. The entire moon god city rumbled as if there was a magnitude 10 earthquake, whoosh. The two rays of light crisscrossed in the sky above moon god city. When the palm and finger slapped out, the sky and earth exploded. The humans in moon god city watched in horror. What happened? Moon goddess, she is moon goddess. Just as the humans in the moon god's city were screaming in shock, the battle high up in the sky entered a state of panic. The sky was filled with demonic light and the blood-red moonlight. The power that was released caused a large number of buildings to collapse, and countless humans died tragically in the aftermath of the battle between the two. Run, hurry up and run. A large number of humans scrambled to escape because the battle between the two was too terrifying. Thousands of miles of land had been reduced to dust. How could they resist such inhuman power? High in the sky, in the void. The yellow sand in the sky whistled wildly. Moon goddess was retreating pathetically. Large amounts of blood spurted out from her mouth. She was struggling to resist Yi Xian's brilliant fist. Bang! 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 The sky was dark. Black clouds covered the sky. Countless bloody lightning bolts crisscrossed in the clouds. Endless sounds of explosions could be heard from all directions. No, impossible, impossible, why are you only at the tribulation stage? Moon Goddess's voice trembled as she spoke. Rumble. The void was collapsing and the earth was shattering. Yi Xian didn't answer Moon Goddess's question. His sword finger slashed across the sky. Rays of sword light thousands of feet long appeared in the sky and violently slashed toward Moon Goddess. Bitch, how dare you mess with my mind? Today, I will devour your cultivation and destroy your soul. You will never be reincarnated. Yi Xian's voice was cruel and ferocious. Clearly, the previous encounter had made him extremely furious. Puchi. Moon God's blood dyed the sky as she fell from the sky. Her slender body smashed into the ground, creating a human-shaped crater. Her sternum had already caved in and blood continuously flowed out of her mouth. Her hair was covered in dust and her appearance was too horrible to look at. Bang! Yi Xian swooped down from the sky. When his feet touched the ground, there was a loud explosion. The ground beneath his feet cracked like a spider web. The terrifying scene made the humans in Moon God City scream. At this moment, Yi Xian's body was shining with demonic light. He reached out with his hand. It was as if the world was twisting. Moon Goddess's broken body was sucked toward him. Puchi. Yi Xian's jade-like palm directly restrained the Moon God's neck and lifted her into the air. His 5 fingers slowly closed, causing a crisp sound to come from the Moon God's throat. It was as if Yi Xian was about to break her neck and kill her in the next moment. Chapter 199. Yi Xian's voice was vicious and cold. His eyes were filled with bloodlust. You're just at the demigod separation stage. You're really courting death. Today, I'll devour your demigod separation stage cultivation to help me reach a higher level. The Moon Goddess's face was pale as she struggled to speak. You. Not only are you at the tribulation passing stage. You've also cultivated a half-immortal body. When she fought with Yi Xian, she realized in despair that not only was she no match for Yi Xian, but she was also defeated in an instant. She didn't even have a chance to fight back. That wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that his body seemed to be made of glazed diamond. His entire body was filled with an immortal aura. He had clearly cultivated a half-immortal body. Unfortunately, it was too late for the Moon Goddess to realize this. Her life was now in Yi Xian's hands. She might die in the next moment. Protect the Moon Goddess. Suddenly, thousands of Moon God guards roared and surrounded Yi Xian from all directions. However, their eyes were filled with fear when they looked at Yi Xian. Boom! Yi Xian's eyes were cold. He didn't waste any words. When he struck out his palm, the void collapsed and exploded. Thousands of Moon God guards instantly exploded into clouds of blood mist. They no longer existed in this world. With Yi Xian clutching her neck, the Moon Goddess found it difficult to breathe. However, she still spoke in a trembling voice, Back. Back off. You're no match for him. Yi Xian. Do you want to become an immortal? I have a great secret to tell you. Hearing the Moon Goddess's words, Yi Xian's ferocious face was slightly stunned. He narrowed his eyes and the killing intent in his eyes gradually disappeared. What secret? Yi Xian's voice was slightly cold. Let me go first. Let me tell you, the Moon Goddess said with a complicated expression. I hope you're not lying to me. Otherwise, I'll let you know that death isn't scary. What's scary is living a life worse than death, Yi Xian said coldly and let go of the Moon Goddess. Come with me. The Moon Goddess narrowly escaped death. She took a deep look at Yi Xian. Her eyes were slightly complicated as if she was hesitating about something. But in the end, she made a decision. She called out to Yi Xian and shot off into the distance. Qi. She took a step forward. She Yi Xian's moon goddess, with the moon goddess's death with Yi Xian, the moon goddess with the moon goddess. A full moon hung in the sky. A 300-meter tall cassia tree was rooted in the sand. Its branches should have been green, but they were filled with the color of blood. Corpses of humans and strange beasts were scattered around the cassia tree, making one feel a sense of fear when looking at it. It was truly a strange story for such a strange osmanthus tree to grow in this desolate sea of sand. It also caused Yi Xian's eyes to narrow as he looked at the osmanthus tree with astonishment from time to time. The charm of an immortal. These 4 simple words caused a huge fluctuation in Yi Xian's heart. This was because under his perception, he could completely feel that this osmanthus tree was alive, and the level of life of this osmanthus tree clearly surpassed that of mortals. If he didn't carefully taste it, he wouldn't be able to sense it at all. Since you know about the moon goddess, you should know that in the moon palace in the earth god realm, there is an osmanthus tree beside the moon goddess said with a deep look in her eyes. What does this have to do with me becoming an immortal? Yi Xian's voice was cold. You can't become an immortal because you are a blood cultivator. There is no spiritual qi in your body. Even if you can pass the 9 heavenly tribulations, the gate to the immortal realm won't open for you. How can you become an immortal? The moon goddess smiled mysteriously at Yi Xian and said, moreover, you are just a puppet. How can Yuan Ling let you become an immortal? Slap. Suddenly, there was a loud slap in the face. Moon goddess was slapped to the ground. There was a red handprint on her beautiful face. Yi Xian's expression was gloomy and cold. When he took a step forward, he suddenly grabbed the moon god's hair and said in a malicious voice, "Bitch, I didn't kill you because you're somewhat useful. If you continue to put on an act in front of me, then I, Yi Xian, will shatter your primordial spirit and make sure you never reincarnate." Ha ha ha. Looking at Yi Xian's ferocious face, the moon goddess sneered, "Did I touch your sore spot? Are you afraid? Beg me, beg me. As long as you beg me, I will tell you how to become an immortal. I will also tell you why the Blood Sea battlefield exists." The moon goddess laughed without restraint. Obviously, she was still angry after being beaten by Yi Xian. Seeing Yi Xian's angry face, she was in a good mood. Clang! The Tongtian sword chi buzzed. The bloodthirsty demonic sword appeared in Yi Xian's hand and pressed against the moon goddess's forehead. The cold tip of the sword looked like it was going to pierce the woman's primordial spirit. "Don't provoke me, and don't try to negotiate with me. I will count to 3. If you don't give me a satisfactory answer, I will make you regret being born into this world." Yi Xian's eyes were gloomy, and his voice was cruel and cold. Although he wanted to know the secret of becoming an immortal from the moon goddess, it didn't mean that he had to beg her. If she continued to play tricks with him, Yi Xian would really kill her without hesitation. 1, 2, Yi Xian said coldly. The bloodthirsty demonic sword had already pierced through the moon goddess's forehead. Drops of blood flowed out from between her eyebrows. Obviously, Yi Xian wasn't just joking. He really wanted to kill her. Seeing Yi Xian's murderous aura, the moon goddess's smile disappeared. Her face was pale. She bit her lips. Before Yi Xian could count to 3, she quickly said, "If you want to become an immortal, you have to disperse all your blood qi. Only then can you truly become an immortal. You are courting death." As the moon goddess's words entered his ears, Yi Xian's face was extremely gloomy. If he dispersed all his blood qi, wouldn't that be the same as destroying his own cultivation? The consequences would be terrifying. How could he accept it? Osmanthus tree. This osmanthus tree can help you transform your blood qi into spiritual qi. Only then can you pass the 9 heavenly immortal tribulations. Only then can the immortal realm gate open for you. You have to know that you are walking the path of blood cultivators, not the path of immortals. If you don't transform your blood chi into spiritual chi, even if you pass the immortal tribulations, you can only stay in this world. You have no hope of becoming an immortal. Under the threat of death, the moon goddess quickly explained. She was afraid that Yi Xian would really kill her in his rage. The bloodthirsty demonic sword disappeared from Yi Xian's hand. He stared blankly at the osmanthus tree in front of him. His expression kept changing. He didn't doubt the moon goddess's words at all. Chapter 200. Yi Xian was not stupid. He knew his own cultivation best and he had read the Immortal Sutra by heart. What the moon goddess said was what he had been worried about the most. Swallowing blood chi to increase his cultivation exponentially. In just a few years, he had entered the tribulation stage. Not to mention the age of Dharma ending, even in the earth immortal realm, where spiritual chi filled the sky, this was unprecedented. Just as the moon goddess said, Yi Xian walked the path of blood cultivation. It had nothing to do with the way of immortals. If he wanted to become an immortal and enter the earth immortal realm, his blood chi would be his greatest reliance but also his greatest shackle. Yi Dao Yu, this osmanthus tree is a seed in the moon palace. It is also an immortal item. Although in this world, this osmanthus tree is grown using blood chi, the essence of the osmanthus tree still contains the charm of immortals. Only this osmanthus tree can help you turn blood chi into spiritual chi. The moon goddess' words were sincere and her eyes were pure and flawless. Clearly, she was not lying. At this moment, Yi Xian stared at the osmanthus tree in front of him in a daze. He sank into deep thought. The moon goddess fell silent. Clearly, she was giving Yi Xian time to think. After 2 hours, Yi Xian woke up from his thoughts. He slowly shook his head and looked at the moon goddess indifferently. He said, "You are right. My blood chi is my greatest shackle. But I will not give up and will not turn it into spiritual chi." Why? Don't you know? If this continues for a long time, even if you continue to absorb blood chi, your cultivation will increase by leaps and bounds. Your path to immortality will be cut off. The moon goddess trembled as she spoke. Her eyes were filled with doubt. Because I don't want to die, Yi Xian said in a low voice. He looked in the direction of Heartbreak Mountain. His eyes flashed with a bloody light. The moon goddess suddenly understood. She sighed and said, "I know. You are worried about Yuanling. That is understandable." That's right, Yi Xian was worried about his origin spirit. If he really turned his blood energy into spiritual energy, then before he became an immortal, this osmanthus tree would be his greatest reliance. If anything happened to this osmanthus tree, then he would be trapped in this world and would be at the mercy of his origin spirit. This was definitely not the result he wanted to see. This was only one of the reasons. The moon goddess. Yi Xian did not trust her. The relationship between the two of them couldn't be said to be enemies, but they definitely couldn't be considered friends either. The moon goddess was so enthusiastic about helping him, so she must have her own motives. This was also the reason why Yi Xian refused. "Tell me, why did you say that I'm a puppet? Where did the blood sea battlefield come from? Who is the origin spirit? And what is your relationship with the moon fairy in the earth immortal realm?" A series of questions came out of Yi Xian's mouth. "You should know that my original form is a jade rabbit. You must have some guesses about my relationship with the moon goddess." As for the blood sea battlefield, as the moon goddess spoke, she brought Yi Xian into a mysterious and vast world. The moon goddess was a jade rabbit in the earth immortal realm. In the distant past, she was brought along by the moon goddess. As time passed, the ancient war began quietly 10,000 years ago. The moon goddess could not remember how she left the moon goddess and participated in the ancient war. She died in the ancient war. Even her remnant soul was suppressed under the endless blood sea. Her memory was incomplete. She only remembered that the ancient war was started by one person. This person was called Yuan Mo. He was the inheritor of the Immortal Sutra. He brought an unimaginable catastrophe to the Earth Immortal realm. On the day the ancient war began, immortals and gods died in the sky. Yuan Mo laughed wildly. The blood of immortals and gods dyed the sky red. The demons were dead, the immortals had fallen, and the entire world had been destroyed. Even though primordial demon's cultivation was unparalleled, he was severely injured and on the verge of death in the face of the immortals. He could only escape to the land of exile. Until the immortals and gods chased Yuan Mo to the land of exile, which was the world Yi Xian was in. In the final battle, Yuan Mo performed the blood sacrifice technique and killed all the immortals and demons. He even suppressed their remnant souls under the blood sea. This space was called the Blood Sea Battlefield, also known as the Ancient Battlefield. It was independent of the Earth Immortal realm and was not in the Dharma ending stage. According to the Moon Goddess, the blood soul strange beasts in the Blood Sea Battlefield were born from the essence and blood of the immortals and demons after they died. This was also the origin of the Blood Sea Battlefield. However, the final battle caused the immortals and gods of the Earth Immortal realm to close the passage between the two worlds. Since then, the spirit Qi in the world Yi Xian was in gradually disappeared, until the Dharma ending stage was formed. As a mysterious corner of the history of the ancient war was revealed, Yi Xian listened attentively. Then, he asked gravely, "Is Yuan Mo dead?" "Who is Yuan Ling?" The Moon Goddess shook her head slowly. Her eyes were slightly perplexed. She said, "I only remember that Yuan Mo also died in the ancient battlefield after performing the blood sacrifice technique. However, I have a feeling that he would not die so easily. Since our remnant souls were able to survive, Yuan Mo must have some life-saving means. Moreover, I have a guess that Yuan Ling's appearance in the Blood Sea battlefield was very sudden. It was as if he appeared in the Blood Sea battlefield out of thin air. Perhaps he is a remnant soul of Yuan Mo. This is not impossible," the Moon Goddess analyzed. "Is primordial spirit the primordial devil?" Yi Xian frowned. He was not surprised by the answer given by the Moon Goddess. This was because he had such a guess in his heart long ago. However, he could not confirm it. "This is only a guess of mine. Whether Yuan Ling is the remnant soul of Yuan Mo is still uncertain." As the Moon Goddess spoke to hear, she looked at Yi Xian with a strange gaze and said, "You cultivate the immortal scripture, so logically speaking, you should be the successor of the original demon. Did you find the corpse of the original demon in the Blood Sea battlefield?" As the Moon Goddess's words entered his ears, Yi Xian's eyes narrowed. It was only now that he realized that although he had been fighting in the Blood Sea battlefield for 4 years and could be said to know the Blood Sea battlefield like the back of his hand, he had not found Yuan Mo's corpse. This was also an unsolved mystery. If my guess is correct, even if Yuan Ling is not the remnant soul of Yuan Mo, he must be closely related to him. You are a puppet in Yuan Ling's hands. I'm afraid that he is also planning a very big scheme by cultivating you, the Moon Goddess said tirelessly. "Why are you helping me?" Yi Xian asked softly as the two of them talked. This was because he still believed that the Moon Goddess would not help him selflessly. "Because only by helping you become an immortal can you take me back to the Earth Immortal's realm. Then, I can return to the Moon Palace and accompany my master." The Moon Goddess smiled sadly and revealed her true purpose. Chapter 201. Do you really believe that I can become an immortal? Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and asked. Yueshan smiled sadly and said, "I didn't believe it before, but after seeing you, I believe it without a doubt. Because I see the shadow of a person in you, and this person is a legend in the Earth Immortal realm. Even though he is stronger than primogenitor demon, he still fell between heaven and earth in the end. Yi Xian didn't ask who this person was, because he had never been anyone's shadow. He was himself. Yi Xian also believed that when he became an immortal, he would ascend the 9 heavens step by step, and all living things would have to prostrate themselves at his feet. Yi Daoyu, I want to remind you of one thing. These remnant souls of immortals and gods who escaped from the ancient battlefield built the sacred city to protect these stupid and ignorant humans, not because they have good intentions. They just want to gather the faith of humans and devour a lot of blood and qi until they become gods. Only then can they return to the earth immortal realm safely without having to go through the immortal tribulation. Moreover, among these gods, my cultivation is only ordinary. The truly terrifying ones are the immortals and demons who are hiding in the dark. If I'm not wrong, their cultivation has now recovered to the tribulation stage. As long as they devour you, they can step into the late stage of the tribulation stage. After they gather the faith of humans all over the world, they will directly become gods and return to the earth immortal realm. You are in danger now, but you don't know it. Yueshan smiled, wanting to see Yi Xian's worried face, but to her surprise, Yi Xian was not afraid at all. Instead, there was a sinister look on his face, which made people who looked at him feel a great chill in their hearts. You are wrong. It is not that they want to devour me, but that I want to devour them. Do you think I let them lurk in this world because I am afraid of them? A contemptuous smile appeared on Yi Xian's face, and he said in a malicious voice, I am just rearing them like livestock. When they become fat, it will be the time of their death. Looking at Yi Xian's cruel and cold face, Yueshan couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Then she became silent, but there was a hint of fear in her eyes when she looked at Yi Xian. You've said everything that needs to be said. In other words, you have no value to me. Although your spirit-severing stage cultivation base isn't strong, it can still help me increase my cultivation base. Yi Xian's face was cold as he walked slowly towards Yueshan, which made her expression change drastically. She looked at Yi Xian with a hint of fear. You want to kill me? Yueshan's face was pale, and even her voice was trembling. She thought that after telling Yi Xian these secrets, even if they were not friends, they were definitely not enemies. But now it seemed that Yi Xian was definitely a wolf with wild ambitions. A cold smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. He walked in front of Yueshan and said, You are wrong. I did want to devour your cultivation before, but now I have changed my mind. I only want to take you as my slave. With a know-it-all like you in the earth immortal realm, you will be of great help to me. Impossible. Yueshan didn't hesitate at all. She even shouted at Yi Xian, I only have one master, and she is the Moon Fairy. Even if you destroy my primordial spirit, I will not agree to it. Ha! Yi Xian smiled contemptuously. When he opened and closed his eyes, there was a flash of cold light. He said, It is not up to you to agree or not. Run. Yueshan didn't hesitate at all. She turned into a beam of light and shot towards the horizon. But before she could travel 100 miles, a giant hand suddenly appeared above her head and slammed her to the ground. She even spat out a large amount of blood. Contract. Rumbling sounds came from all directions. A blood-red rune flew across the sky. Before Yueshan could react, it merged with her mind. Buzz. Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of the woman. A satisfied expression appeared on his face as he said, Your primordial spirit has already been implanted with a blood contract. As long as I will it, I will be able to scatter your soul and kill you. From now on, you will be my servant, and don't even think about escaping my control. Yi Xian, kill me if you can. I will never acknowledge you as my master. Yueshan's face was pale, but she still shouted angrily. Although death was scary, she only had one master. Even if Yi Xian used death to force her to submit, it was impossible. Looking at Yueshan's unyielding face, Yi Xian frowned. He knew that this woman was not afraid of death. This made him say coldly, Don't you want to return to the Earth God's realm and the Moon Fairy's side? I can promise you that as long as you work for me loyally, none of this will be a problem. Since threats didn't work, then he would tempt her. There was always a way to make this woman submit. This was Yi Xian's way of controlling people. When the moon goddess mentioned the moon goddess, she clenched her teeth and glared hatefully at Yi Xian. Then, she nodded. It was obvious that the moon goddess was more important to her than her own life. Successfully subduing this woman was Yi Xian's biggest gain from this trip. But there was one thing that bothered Yi Xian. The moon fairy. These 4 simple words made Yi Xian's heart flutter. Although Yueshan had only transformed into the moon fairy's appearance, Yi Xian's heart was still fluttering. The feeling of being moved made him panic. Then, is the moon fairy still in the moon palace? When he thought of the moon fairy, Yi Xian suddenly spoke out, causing him to instantly wake up. However, it was already too late by the time Yi Xian regretted it. After all, he'd already spoken, so it was too late to take it back. Ha! Looking at Yi Xian's embarrassed face, Yueshan smiled disdainfully and said, "Stop dreaming. Even if you become an immortal, you won't be worthy of carrying her shoes, let alone immortal now. I can tell you that all the immortals, gods, and Buddhas, even the supreme being in charge of the 3 realms, are in love with her. If you become an immortal and enter the Earth Immortal realm one day, you'd better not have any ideas about her. Because you are not qualified." Yueshan mocked him mercilessly. She did not give Yi Xian any face at all. This made Yi Xian's face turn cold. He suddenly reached out and grabbed Yueshan's neck. He said in a malicious voice, "Let me tell you, I don't have any ideas about the moon fairy. Even if I, Yi Xian, am interested in her, I just want to play with the most beautiful woman in the world. So what?" Yi Xian's words were extremely vulgar. Yueshan blushed and shouted, "You, how dare you? You are shameless. How dare you blaspheme my master!" Bang! Yi Xian casually threw the moon god to the ground and smashed a deep hole in the ground. His voice was cold as he said, "Shameless? Blaspheme? Let me tell you, there is nothing in this world that I, Yi Xian, do not dare to do. I will not continue to be weak. Whether it is the supreme being of the 3 realms or the Daluo Jinxian, who is beyond the 3 realms and not in the 5 elements, I, Yi Xian, will ascend to the 9 heavens one day and trample them all under my feet. Even if the moon fairy is the most beautiful woman in the world, I want her to kneel in front of me and let me play with her. She will not dare to complain." As Yi Xian's words fell, Yueshan's heart was about to explode. She wanted to scold Yi Xian angrily, but she swallowed her words because she had already seen the murderous intent in Yi Xian's eyes. Okay. Everyone knows how to boast. I will wait for that day to come. But Yi Xian, I want to tell you that if you really enter the Earth Immortal realm one day, you will realize how childish and ridiculous what you said today is. If these words reach the ears of the gods and immortals, you will end up in a miserable state," Yueshan scolded loudly. "Let's wait and see if I am boasting or not. You are my servant now, and as a servant, you have to respect your master. I can spare your life this time, but if you continue to be so disrespectful, I will roast your primordial spirit in the underworld fire. You will never be reincarnated," Yi Xian said viciously. He grabbed Yueshan's clothes and turned into a beam of light, returning to Yueshan City. Chapter 202. Moon God City. For the past few days, the humans in the city had been very cautious because their moon god had been defeated by the Eastern Divine King, Yi Xian. They prayed in their hearts that the moon god could survive so that she could protect them. After a few days, the moon god reappeared in the moon god city. The humans in the city finally felt relieved and everything returned to normal. However, they still remembered how terrifying Yi Xian was. The moon god palace was rebuilt in a few days. In the palace, Yi Xian was sitting on the main seat, quietly reading a book in his hand. Wu Juexian and dozens of members of the Mansion of the Dead stood on either side of him. After the moon god had become Yi Xian's servant, she had released Wu Juexian and the others. At this moment, the moon god's face was gloomy as she stood beside Yi Xian. Obviously, Yi Xian had been bossing her around these past few days, which made her feel very uncomfortable. However, she did not dare to resist. After all, she was counting on Yi Xian to bring her back to the Earth God realm. Moon God. Yes, Your Majesty. The moon god bowed. Yi Xian closed the book and said calmly, "This is the map of the Western holy cities that you know about?" "That's right. In every holy city, there is a remnant soul of an immortal god. Their cultivation levels vary. The weakest one has just recovered to the nascent soul stage and the strongest one is in the soul-severing stage." The moon god said. "Good." Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and nodded slowly. However, there was a flash of blood in his eyes. Yi Xian's idea was simple. His current cultivation level was in the middle stage of the crossing calamity stage. If he wanted to enter the later stage of the crossing calamity stage quickly, he would need to devour a large amount of blood qi. Although there were many blood soul exotic beasts around the world, he could not go around killing them. After all, the blood qi of these blood soul exotic beasts was too little. Even if he devoured them, it would take a long time and it would not increase his cultivation level. Only the remnant souls of these immortal gods could help him enter the later stage of the crossing calamity stage quickly. That's right. Yi Xian was ready to attack these immortal god remnant souls. Because of his conversation with the moon god, he felt a sense of urgency. His desire to become an immortal was extremely strong. Not only did Yi Xian want to kill these immortal god remnant souls to improve his cultivation base, but he also wanted to prepare for the battle with Yuanling in the future. If he didn't get rid of Yuanling, he wouldn't be able to sleep at night. "Zhu Xian, bring the members of the underworld back to Jiangnan. I'm going to stay in the west for a while," Yi Xian said after some thought. Wu Juexian bowed and asked Yi Xian, "Yes, sir. But Sword Saint Sith is a subordinate of Moon God. I have locked him up in the dungeon. What should we do with him?" "She's just an ant. Just kill her," Yi Xian said coldly. "Wait." Moon God's face changed. She quickly said to Yi Xian, "You cannot kill this person. I have already refined her into a ghost body. She is very useful to me." Bang! Suddenly, a bloody light slapped Moon God away. The sound of bones breaking could be heard. Yi Xian's face was gloomy. He said, "Moon God, remember your current status. No one can go against my words." "Yi Xian, you." Moon God's mouth was filled with blood. Blood flowed out of the moon goddess's mouth, and she was so angry that her delicate body trembled. However, as Yi Xian pointed out, a bloody light covered the woman, and a soul-tearing pain caused her to scream miserably. "Ah! Stop, stop! Pain!" Extreme pain appeared on her primordial spirit. It made Moon God collapse to the ground. Her body was twitching. It was as if thousands of knives were cutting her flesh. The pain made her scream. She wanted to destroy her primordial spirit and die. Buzz! Yi Xian's palm brushed through the air, and the bloody light that enveloped the moon god's body dissipated, causing the woman to fall limply to the ground. Her curvy body was drenched in cold sweat, and she was constantly gasping for breath. "Remember, this is a small lesson for you. I don't care how much moon gods spoiled you. You are my servant now. You have to follow my orders. Do you understand?" Yi Xian said eerily. I understand." Moon God said weakly. "Louder. I can't hear you." "I understand," Moon God shouted. Moon God screamed, but a lot of tears came out of her eyes. She was sobbing. Clearly, her master was once the Moon Fairy. In the distant past, all the immortals and gods had to curry favor with her for the sake of the moon fairy. But now that he'd fallen into Yi Xian's hands, not only had he been reduced to becoming Yi Xian's servant, as long as he showed the slightest bit of dissatisfaction, he'd be tortured by the other party. How could the moon goddess not feel wronged and sad? Looking at moon god's pale face, Yi Xian smiled coldly. In fact, Yi Xian didn't care whether he killed Sword Saint Sith or not. However, an arrogant woman like Moon God had to be taught a lesson. If he showed her too much respect, she would only ask for more. In a mysterious and unknown space in Dongying, the void was silent. The Kusanagi sword floated in the void. Takashi Miyamoto sat cross-legged. Spiritual light surrounded him. He gave off a peaceful and indifferent feeling. Breathe in. The spiritual chi was like water, slowly inhaling and exhaling. As Miyamoto Takeda inhaled and exhaled, his body glowed. The Kusanagi sword above his head gradually became illusory. After half a day, the Kusanagi sword suddenly turned into a beam of spiritual light and merged into Miyamoto Takeda's forehead. Suddenly, Takashi Miyamoto opened his eyes. A beam of spiritual light flashed across his eyes. A transcendent aura bloomed around him. Master, I did it. There was no joy or excitement. Takashi Miyamoto was very calm. He was so calm that there wasn't a single ripple. It was tranquil, ethereal, and ethereal. A feeling of simplicity permeated this space until a black shadow appeared beside Takashi Miyamoto. The shadow said in a low voice, "Very good. You were able to withstand the power of the heavenly sword of clouds. This has allowed you to reach the form synthesis stage. If the spiritual chi of heaven and earth is still here, I wouldn't be surprised if you reached the crossing calamity stage. Master, I just want to kill Yi Xian. I don't dare to hope for the so-called tribulation stage," Takashi Miyamoto said with a smile. "I have to remind you that the spiritual chi in your body is given by the Kusanagi sword. There is no spiritual chi in this world for you to absorb. If the spiritual chi in your body is exhausted, you will become immortal again. The Kusanagi sword will also devour you. Do you still want to kill him?" the black shadow said. Break. A simple word proved Takashi Miyamoto's determination. The mysterious space cracked like a spider web. With a loud bang, Takashi Miyamoto appeared in the outside world. On Cherry Blossom Mountain, Takashi Miyamoto was wearing a white robe. He stood on the peak of the mountain. The cold wind blew, causing his clothes to flutter. He was surrounded by spiritual light and was smiling. He gave off an extraordinary aura. Chapter 203. The cold wind whistled past. Takashi Miyamoto looked around. The cherry blossoms that he used to love the most were no longer there. The entire Cherry Blossom Mountain had turned into a charred land. Many human corpses could be seen everywhere. My people are crying. Their souls are wailing. My country is no longer a country. My family is no longer a family. Yi Xian, it's all thanks to you. Takashi Miyamoto muttered to himself. He looked at the eastern land of oceans from the Cherry Blossom Mountain. What he saw was a chaotic battle between warlords and blood-soul mutant beasts slaughtering his people. Corpses were everywhere. The eastern land of oceans had turned into a living hell. Even though Takashi Miyamoto had obtained the inheritance of the Kusanagi sword and reached the form synthesis stage, he couldn't change this outcome. "Snow, come!" Takashi Miyamoto called out softly. When he pointed at the sky, a cold wind blew. Snow fell like goose feathers, burying the corpses everywhere in the wind and snow. It was as if Takashi Miyamoto's last thoughts were buried. Right and wrong, success and failure vanish in the blink of an eye. How many sunsets do you experience in life? Yi Xian, have you never thought that everything in this world has karma? Takashi Miyamoto murmured to himself. He took a step forward. The void suddenly shattered, and he disappeared. The eastern land of oceans was in ruins. Takashi Miyamoto strolled in the sky. He looked down at his country indifferently. As he walked through every part of the eastern land of oceans, his eyes became heavier and heavier. A small town by the sea was dead silent. Blood flowed everywhere. Many human corpses could be seen everywhere. Tens of thousands of mutant beasts were devouring human flesh in the town. They roared excitedly and ferociously from time to time. Takashi Miyamoto sat cross-legged in the void. He looked at this scene calmly. When he opened his eyes, a trace of sadness flashed across them. Ultimate ruin. Takashi Miyamoto uttered these two simple words, causing the world to rumble. The Kusanagi sword appeared between his eyebrows and shone brightly. Rumble. The heavenly sword fell on the town. Many buildings turned into ashes. Tens of thousands of mutant beasts howled miserably and turned into a bloody mist that was blown away by the cold wind. Dong! Takashi Miyamoto took a step forward, and the Kusanagi sword circled around him. The man and the sword disappeared into thin air. Only the destroyed town proved that Takashi Miyamoto had been here. The missile rumbled and streaked across the sky. A large number of high-tech weapons were emitting terrifying tongues of flame as they whistled towards Takashi Miyamoto high in the sky. The first slash of the sword caused the heavens and the earth to roar. The so-called missiles turned into flames that filled the sky. The second slash of the sword caused the army on the ground to be completely wiped out. Along the way, Miyamoto Takeaki had wiped out all the warlords in Japan. A large number of blood soul mutated beasts had died under the Kusanagi sword. However, the entire Japan no longer existed, and there were very few humans left. Every time Miyamoto Takeaki attacked, the indifferent and emotionless aura around him would become denser, and his aura would become ethereal. This was the unique aura of cultivators. The capital of Japan. The bustling metropolis had been reduced to ruins. It was as if it was a dead city. There was no longer any of the hustle and bustle of the past. Occasionally, some Japanese would appear on the streets. They were even fighting each other for some food. The victors laughed maniacally, while the losers turned into corpses. Along the way, Takashi Miyamoto saw everything. The sorrowful aura around him became denser and denser. When he arrived outside the Emperor Pavilion, a large number of guards were on guard. However, when they saw Takashi Miyamoto's face, they immediately cried out in surprise. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! You're not dead yet? Following the commotion, more than 10 courtiers walked out of the Emperor Pavilion. There were also Takashi Miyamoto's children and relatives. When they saw Takashi Miyamoto, tears welled up in their eyes. They were so excited that they could not control themselves. Father, I knew you were still alive. A young man wearing a crown and an imperial robe staggered toward Takashi Miyamoto. He even knelt in front of Takashi Miyamoto and cried out loud. Father, I missed you so much. A Japanese princess staggered over and threw herself into Takashi Miyamoto's arms. The tears in her eyes wet Takashi Miyamoto's clothes. Father, it's my incompetence that caused Japan to fail. The young man kowtowed in shame. His body was trembling at this moment. Your Majesty, it's good that you're back. We'll definitely rebuild Japan. Many courtiers cried as they looked at Takashi Miyamoto with hope. At this moment, Takashi Miyamoto laughed at himself. He slowly stroked his daughter's hair and said in a gentle voice, Japan has been destroyed. I'm no longer the emperor. I'm just a sinner of Japan. Father, let's leave Japan and find a place to live in seclusion. Even if we're not part of the royal family, our family can still live together peacefully, the Japanese princess said while sobbing. Takashi Miyamoto slowly pushed his daughter away. The aura around him gradually became cold and ethereal. He said in a low voice, although Japan is no longer around, I have to take revenge. Otherwise, how can I face my ancestors and the dead people of Japan after I die? Go. Leave Japan and find a place to live the rest of your lives peacefully. Takashi Miyamoto's body was covered by the spiritual light. He firmly imprinted the faces of his children in his mind. There was no longer any reluctance in his eyes. When he took a step forward, the Kusanagi sword shot out from between his brows. The man and the sword turned into two streams of light and shot towards Xia country in the east. That's the Kusanagi sword. An courtier exclaimed in shock. It can't be wrong. It must be the Kusanagi sword. Another courtier's face flushed red as he cheered excitedly. Father, I will never leave. Even if Japan has been destroyed, I will wait for you to kill Yi Xian. We will rebuild Japan together. The Japanese prince clenched his fists and roared. In the Western world, a stream of light shuttled through the clouds. The terrifying explosion made one's eardrums buzz and turned a large amount of clouds into water vapor. Yi Xian was dressed in black. His expression was calm, but his eyes were flashing with blood. The killing intent around him was extremely dense. He was shooting toward a city in the distance. Boom! The void shook and space froze. When Yi Xian stood in the sky above the city, his expression became extremely gloomy. This was because there was not a single living person in the city below. There were only floating corpses. This is already the fourth dead city. Yi Xian muttered to himself. Yi Xian stayed in the Western world. He originally wanted to hunt down the remnant souls of the immortals and devour their cultivation. However, when he passed by the four holy cities, regardless of whether it was the remnant souls of the immortals or the humans living in the cities, they were all dead. It was obvious that someone had acted before him and devoured all the blood and chi of these living beings. Cruel, brutal, and vicious. Moreover, no one was left alive. This was the scene that Yi Xian saw. Chapter 204. That was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that when Yi Xian examined the corpses of the immortal gods' remnant souls, he found that there was not a single drop of blood in their bodies. The technique that devoured them was actually a technique from the immortal scripture. Obviously, Yuan Ling had made his move. Moreover, he had nurtured a person and passed the immortal scripture to him. Yuan Ling, I'd like to see what kind of person this successor of yours is, Yi Xian said coldly. Boom! Yi Xian took a step forward and turned into a ray of black light that shot forward. At the same time, in Jiangnan city of the Xia country, the world was filled with cold winds and heavy snow. The fluttering snowflakes were crystal clear, but they were sharp weapons that could take lives. They were ruthlessly reaping the lives of the members of the Mansion of the Dead. Boom! The heavenly sword fell, crushing mountains and rivers. The Qingyun hut could not bear the heavy burden and was reduced to ashes. Many members of the Mansion of the Dead died tragically under the heavenly sword. Amitabha! Death light covered the sky and the void trembled. Monk Yuan Su rushed into the sky. He stared at Takashi Miyamoto in the void with a gloomy look. Extreme fear flashed across his eyes. Immortal. Immortal cultivator. How is this possible? When he saw the spiritual light surrounding Takashi Miyamoto, Monk Yuan Su's eyes narrowed. Even his voice trembled slightly. Clearly, he did not understand why Takashi Miyamoto had spiritual light protecting him when the world was in its final phase. You're no match for me. Call Yi Xian out. Takashi Miyamoto's voice was calm, but when he opened and closed his eyes, there was a flash of hostility. Who are you? Monk Yuan Su tried his best to calm himself down. His voice was extremely solemn. Takashi Miyamoto. The four simple words were filled with the power to shake the soul. Instantly, Yuan Su's primordial spirit became unstable. A trace of dark red blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, martial Tao was boundless, and blood qi soared into the sky. Wu Juexian's expression was solemn. He instantly appeared beside monk Yuan Su. The extremely terrifying blood qi was released, allowing the two of them to resist the terrifying pressure released by Takashi Miyamoto. At this moment, on the ground, Fatso Huang and the others looked solemn. They had already seen that monk Yuan Su and Wu Juexian were at a disadvantage. They did not seem to be Miyamoto Takeyaki's match. Junting, take the members of Underworld with you. We need to leave quickly, Fatso Huang said coldly. Are you kidding me? How can we abandon Yuan Su and Wu Juexian? Zhuo Junting's expression changed drastically as she retorted. Idiot. If I'm not wrong, the sword in his hand is definitely the legendary Skycluster sword. Didn't you see that even Yuan Su wasn't a match for him? Fatso Huang roared angrily. No, if we run away now, the reputation of the underworld will plummet. I won't agree to it. Zhuo Junting's pretty face was filled with anger. With the blood sword in her hand, she flew across the sky towards Miyamoto Takeaki. Fuck. Fatso Huang's face was as gloomy as water, but he couldn't stop Zhuo Junting. This made his expression uncertain. He didn't know if he should retreat or fight Miyamoto Takeda to the death. Die. Zhuo Junting flew across the sky. When she slashed out with her sword, it carried a ruthless aura as it stabbed towards Miyamoto Takeda's heart. Junting, retreat quickly. Wu Juexian roared loudly. When he took a step forward, his body was surrounded by a protective aura. Yuan Su's expression also changed. He clasped his palms together and an extreme death ray appeared around him. He also shot towards Zhuo Junting. Foolish mortal, you're courting death. Miyamoto Takeda said indifferently. He didn't even use the Skycluster sword. He simply slapped out with his palm. A giant palm glowing with spiritual light slammed towards Zhuo Junting. No! Fatso Huang roared loudly. His eyes were wide open, but he still saw Zhuo Junting being smashed into pieces by the giant palm. Not even a corpse was left behind. Bang! 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 Yuan Su and Wu Juexian went completely berserk. They didn't care if they were a match for Miyamoto Takeda. They used all kinds of offensive techniques to attack him. The void exploded, and light shone brightly. Miyamoto Takeda didn't move in the face of the two's joint attack. He looked at them as if he was looking at two ants. Bang! Miyamoto Takeda slapped out with his palm. The void collapsed, and the two were sent flying. Their bodies cracked, and a large amount of blood dyed their bodies red. We'll hold him back. You guys leave quickly. Wu Juexian's eyes were bloodshot. He roared at Fatso Huang and the members of the underworld. The two of them once again joined forces to attack Miyamoto Takeda. Let's go. Fatso Huang clenched his fists. His veins were bulging. He knew that even if he and the others stayed here, they wouldn't be of any help. They could only wait for Yi Xian to return to the Xia country. Only then could they take revenge. A large number of members of the underworld fled under Fatso Huang's lead. Wu Juexian and Yuan Su stood in front of Miyamoto Takeda with their lives, buying time for Fatso Huang and the others to escape. West, Moon God City. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the Moon God Palace. As he breathed, blood qi boiled around him. A series of hurried footsteps came from outside the palace. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. A member of the underworld staggered over. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He even bowed to Yi Xian and said, "Netherlord, something happened in Jiangnan." Looking at the panicked expression of the member of the underworld, Yi Xian was stunned. An extremely bad feeling rose in his heart. He said in a slightly gloomy voice, "Don't panic. Speak slowly. Netherlord. See for yourself." The member of the underworld's voice trembled. He quickly took out a satellite phone and handed it to Yi Xian. A video was playing on the phone's screen. In the video, 2 fine iron chains pierced through Wu Juexian and Monk Yuan Su's shoulder blades. A large amount of blood soaked their bodies. No one knew if they were dead or alive. Miyamoto Takeyaki's expression was indifferent. He stood in front of the two. His cold voice echoed in the video. Yi Xian, I'll only give you 3 days. If I don't see you in 3 days, you can collect the corpses of your 2 subordinates. The video was not a live broadcast. It was only a dozen seconds long. Obviously, a long time had passed since this video was recorded. At this moment, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. His expression was calm. No one knew what he was thinking. This member of the underworld did not dare to breathe too loudly. However, the temperature of the entire Moon God Palace was quietly dropping. Where did this video come from? Yi Xian opened his eyes and asked calmly. Netherlord, I intercepted this video from the internet. It has been 3 hours since it was released, the member of the underworld quickly replied. That's all. You can leave now. Yi Xian nodded and dismissed the person. Are you leaving? A series of footsteps came from behind Yi Xian. The moon god had a complicated expression on her face. Yi Xian smiled. There was an indescribable cruelty in his smile, but his voice was very calm. He said, some people have a death wish. I can only fulfill his wish. I will let him know that death is not scary. What's scary is the torment of life and death. Looking at the smile on Yi Xian's face, the moon god's face turned pale. Her hair stood on end at this moment. She looked at Yi Xian with a hint of fear in her eyes. You have to prepare for what I've told you. When the plan is activated, it will be the time when I, Yi Xian, become an immortal. As long as this matter is completed, you can follow me to the Earth God realm. Yi Xian said softly and walked out of the Moon God Palace. The Moon God looked at Yi Xian's back as he walked away. A hint of determination flashed in her eyes. She hid herself in the dark. Chapter 205. Jiangnan City had turned into scorched earth, and the city was in ruins. The entire Jiangnan City had long been deserted, and a large number of corpses could be seen everywhere. Indifferent, emotionless, and covered in spiritual light, Takashi Miyamoto had an otherworldly temperament. This was the aura of an authentic immortal cultivator. He was also the only real immortal cultivator in the world. He stood between heaven and earth and looked around. The cold wind was howling, and the snow was dancing wildly in the sky. It was as if he was the only one in the world. Wu Juexian and Wu Juexian's faces were pale, and their eyes were tightly shut. Their bodies were pierced by 2 fine iron chains, and they were suppressed in the void by Takashi Miyamoto. No one knew if they were dead or alive. The sun rose and the moon set, and the stars moved. 3 days and 3 nights had passed, but Takashi Miyamoto had not moved. He had been standing high in the sky. The snow was getting heavier, and the wind and moon were getting stronger. He was waiting for Yi Xian's arrival. He wanted to avenge Dongying, even if he had to die together with Yi Xian. Satellites from all over the world had detected this scene, and this scene was broadcasted live to the eyes of the world. No one knew if Yi Xian would appear, but the beginning of this unprecedented battle attracted the attention of the world. The sun was setting, and night had fallen. When the night sky was dotted with stars and a waning moon hung in the sky, Takashi Miyamoto slowly opened his eyes. The spiritual light around him suddenly blazed, and he looked into the distance. His originally indifferent expression finally changed. Yi Xian, you're finally here. Buzz. The clouds and sky dispersed, and the world was dark. The blood light that covered the sky enveloped the entire Jiangnan city. A slender figure crossed the sky. His aura was not obvious, and there was no trace of smoke or fire. He appeared calmly in the sky above Jiangnan city. The world was silent, and there was no sound. Yi Xian was dressed in black, and his black hair fell behind his head. He looked at Takashi Miyamoto indifferently. His face was expressionless, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Yi Xian, do you know what kind of feeling I had when I walked out of the door and saw the devastation in Dongying? When my people cried and their souls wailed at me, do you know what kind of feeling I had? Takashi Miyamoto's eyes were in a trance as he muttered to himself. The spiritual light around him was fluctuating violently. Today, I came here with the Kusanagi sword, bearing the anger of the Japanese. I will cut off your head and offer it to their souls in heaven. Miyamoto Taketian was no longer there. His face was ferocious and distorted. The spiritual light around him swept through the void, causing the world to become extremely distorted. A terrifying sound of collapse could be heard. High in the sky, in the void. Yi Xian put his hands behind his back, and there was no aura around him. He looked at Takashi Miyamoto calmly and said in a calm voice, "If I were you, I wouldn't talk so much nonsense. Don't you know that every villain dies quickly because they talk too much nonsense?" Ha! Takashi Miyamoto laughed wildly. The heavenly sword shone with boundless spiritual light, and the terrifying spiritual energy broke through the clouds. His shrill and ferocious words exploded in the world. Villain? If I'm a villain, then what are you, Yi Xian? In terms of killing, how many lives have you taken, Yi Xian? In terms of viciousness, I, Takashi Miyamoto, admit defeat. How dare an evil demon like you call me a villain? Isn't this the biggest joke in the world? Takashi Miyamoto roared. His eyes were bloodshot as he looked at Yi Xian, and there was an extremely terrifying murderous intent in them. Since ancient times, the winner has always been the king, and the loser has always been the bandit. History has always been written by the victors. Today, I will kill you here. In the history of mankind, you will be a villain. Don't you understand this principle? Yi Xian said calmly. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Takashi Miyamoto was stunned. His fists were clenched tightly, and he was speechless. Yi Xian, you're right. History has always been written by the victors. However, the one who will die today will be you, not me. Because I will let you know how terrifying a real cultivator is. Takashi Miyamoto's face was cold as he roared at Yi Xian. Ultimate destruction. The sky shook, and the world exploded. As Takashi Miyamoto formed a seal, an extremely terrifying spiritual light surged around him. This spiritual light covered the sky and the earth, and it made the Kusanagi sword rumble. The 3-foot-long sword was expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. 1 foot. 100 feet. 100 feet. 100 feet. 100,000 feet. The Kusanagi sword was glowing. It was a spiritual light that had never been seen before. When the Kusanagi sword became 10,000 feet long, the sword that traversed the sky looked as if it was going to shatter the world. Tong Tian moved the earth and crushed the past and present. Takashi Miyamoto stood high in the sky, and the 10,000 feet long heavenly sword floated above his head. The destructive aura spread in all directions. The earth was collapsing, and the void was being annihilated. This terrifying scene was enough to make one's scalp tingle. Yi Xian, today, I will destroy your physical body and your primordial spirit. You will never be reincarnated. Slash! Takashi Miyamoto roared. His sword was like the sky, cutting across the endless sky. The terrifying spiritual light completely covered him. The 10,000 feet long heavenly sword moved along with his sword finger, and it fell toward Yi Xian with the power to destroy the world. Rumble. This sword could destroy everything. This sword could crush mountains and rivers. Just the aftermath of the 10,000 feet long heavenly sword caused the entire Jiangnan city to sink thousands of feet. The buildings on the ground were directly turned into dust, and the people watching the live broadcast screamed in horror. Ha! Yi Xian, I am a true immortal cultivator, and you are just a blood cultivator. You damn bastard, go to hell. Takashi Miyamoto was completely crazy. He laughed wildly. The 10,000 feet long heavenly sword suddenly descended in front of Yi Xian. The bright and terrifying spiritual light instantly drowned Yi Xian's body. Heaven and earth shook, and everything wailed. This was Takashi Miyamoto's strongest sword move, and it was also his ultimate move. This sword move had a very nice name, and it was called Ultimate. Everything was buried, and heaven and earth returned to the void. This was the true meaning of this sword move. No one could survive this move, and Takashi Miyamoto had no doubt about it. Is he dead? Takashi Miyamoto panted heavily, and the spiritual light around him dimmed. He stared at Yi Xian's position, and the ruthlessness in his eyes was extremely intense. Disciple, leave quickly. A trembling roar came to Takashi Miyamoto's ears. Takashi Miyamoto's expression changed drastically. He could not believe what he was seeing. At the place where the 10,000 feet long heavenly sword fell, the dazzling spiritual light dissipated, and a slender figure stood between heaven and earth. Yi Xian had one hand behind his back as his jet-black hair fluttered in the wind. He didn't reveal the slightest bit of his aura, nor did he cover it with any light. He only slightly raised his sword fingers, and a terrifying blood light blossomed from his fingertips as he pointed it at the tip of the heavenly sword. Buzz! The 10,000 feet long heavenly sword wailed, and the spiritual light enveloping the sword dimmed. The sword that traversed the sky was trembling, and traces of cracks spread on the sword, as if it would collapse between heaven and earth at any time. Chapter 206. He's at the tribulation stage and has cultivated a half-immortal body. Let's go. Qing Tian roared and panicked. The Kusanagi sword suddenly shrank, and a black shadow appeared on the sword. It turned into a beam of light and directly tore through the endless void. Before Takashi Miyamoto woke up from his daze, it directly pulled him into the void and instantly disappeared from the sky above Jiangnan City. Heaven and Earth teleportation technique? Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and said word by word. His voice was extremely gloomy. The black shadow that suddenly appeared had used a divine ability that only a great cultivator could use. Yi Xian was caught off guard, and his expression was extremely gloomy. The Heaven and Earth teleportation technique was a type of divine ability that could teleport 100,000 kilometers in an instant. Yi Xian was also cultivating this divine ability, but he hadn't mastered it yet. It was just that he didn't think that there would be someone who could use this divine ability in this world where the world was at the end of its days. You can't run away. Yi Xian's eyes were sinister, and his voice was cruel and ferocious. He took a step forward and suddenly turned into a stream of light that headed toward Dongying. The stream of light flew through the void. With an explosion, a gap was torn in space. Takashi Miyamoto fell from the sky with the Kusanagi sword and crashed into a nameless mountain. Pfft! Takashi Miyamoto spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were dull as if he had lost his soul. He lay on the mountain and muttered. Why? Why? Why can't I kill him? Suddenly, Takashi Miyamoto got up from the ground. He grabbed the Kusanagi sword tightly. His face was ferocious and twisted as he roared, Master, come out. Tell me. Didn't you say that the Kusanagi sword can destroy the world and will definitely kill Yi Xian? Buzz. A wisp of black smoke drifted out from the heaven cluster cloud sword. The black shadow's light dimmed, as if it was going to dissipate at any moment. He is at the crossing calamity stage. He has the body of a half-immortal. You can't kill him. If I didn't risk my soul to use the Heaven and Earth teleportation technique, both of us would have died in his hands. The black shadow said weakly. His voice was trembling to the extreme. Miyamoto Takeyaki's face froze when he heard the black shadow's words. He slumped to the ground and clenched his fists. Blue veins popped out on his fists, proving the extent of the shock in his heart. Suddenly, Miyamoto Takeyaki's face turned pale. He suddenly snapped out of his thoughts and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He seemed to have thought of something. He picked up the Kusanagi sword and was about to leave. Where are you going? The black shadow stopped breathing and blocked Miyamoto Takeyaki's path. At this moment, Miyamoto Takeyaki's face was pale, and his teeth were chattering. His voice trembled as he said, I killed Yi Xian's subordinates. He will definitely not let this go. With his vicious personality, he will definitely go to Japan to silence my family. Idiot! The black shadow roared and reprimanded, it wasn't easy for me to save you. If you return to Japan now, not only will your family die, but you will also die in his hands. Teacher. Then what should I do? How could Miyamoto Takeyaki not understand this logic? This also made him kneel on the ground, his body trembling to the extreme. If you want to reach a higher level, you can only give up on them and avenge them in the future, the black shadow roared coldly. However, his aura was chaotic, and it was obvious that he did not mean it. The black shadow knew that Miyamoto Takeyaki would never be able to take revenge in this lifetime. His strength was only given by the Kusanagi sword, and the Kusanagi sword was half destroyed. How could they be a match for Yi Xian? Teacher, you're lying to me. Do you really think I'm a 3-year-old child? Suddenly, Miyamoto Takeyaki raised his head and looked at the black shadow. Tears of blood appeared in his eyes. The Dharma of heaven and earth has ended, and the spiritual energy no longer exists. The Kusanagi sword was destroyed in Yi Xian's hands. Even if I don't care about the lives of my children, how can I take revenge? Faced with Miyamoto Takeyaki's questioning, the black shadow's aura became chaotic, and the atmosphere became deathly silent. Child, do you know who I am? The black shadow was silent for a long time before he finally sighed and said, I am the first emperor of Japan, Miyamoto Masakawa. You are my only descendant. If you die, I will really have no descendants. Hearing the black shadow's words, Miyamoto Takeyaki's face was stunned. He did not recover from his shock for a full 10 breaths. It was also at this moment that he finally understood why the black shadow had been helping him selflessly. The Dharma of heaven and earth has ended, and the spiritual energy no longer exists. I was unwilling to die of old age in this world. I poured all my cultivation into the Kusanagi sword and sealed my remnant soul into the Muramasa demon blade. I hoped that one day, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth would recover, and I would be able to reappear in the world and enter the legendary Earth Immortal realm. However, thousands of years have passed, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has never recovered. I risked my life to save you from Yi Xian and exhausted all my vitality. My soul is about to dissipate and I will die. Miyamoto Masakawa smiled bitterly. His soul was dissipating, and he looked at Miyamoto Takeyaki with a hint of love and farewell. My child, you have to live well. The Kusanagi sword still contains my power. As long as you can wait for the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to recover, you will be able to step into the tribulation stage and even ascend to the Earth Immortal realm. Remember my words. Give up on your children and live well. You are the last hope of the Miyamoto family. A gust of wind blew, and Miyamoto Masakawa's remnant soul dissipated between heaven and earth. However, his words kept echoing in Miyamoto Takeyaki's ears. Ancestor, I will definitely live well. Miyamoto Takeyaki knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Blood tears flowed out of his eyes as he wailed loudly. Japan, Emperor Pavilion. The officials trembled and prostrated on the ground. The prince and princess of Japan's faces were pale. Their bodies were trembling uncontrollably, and they staggered backward. They were terrified, and their eyes were filled with despair. This was because an extremely terrifying person was walking towards them. Yi Xian's face was calm as he strolled forward. Behind him, Fatso Huang had a sinister look on his face. He held a camera in his hand and followed Yi Xian into this place. Yi Xian, what are you doing? The Prince of Japan asked in a trembling voice. What a pity. Yi Xian did not answer. He flicked his finger, and a sword light cut off the Prince of Japan's knees, causing him to scream in agony. Legs. My legs. This scene made the officials tremble in fear. No one dared to step forward to stop Yi Xian. This was because they knew that even Miyamoto Takeaki had been defeated by Yi Xian. They were just a group of mortals. How could they be a match for Yi Xian? Brother. The Princess of Japan hugged her brother's body tightly and cried loudly. She looked at Yi Xian with hatred in her eyes. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.